welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And this is part 2 of our Banjo-Tooie Spotlight series. On this episode, we'll actually be discussing the game. We're going to be going from the first world, Mayahem Temple, through the fourth world, Jolly Roger's Lagoon, with also some nice chat about Spiral Mountain and the Isle o' Hags as an overworld concept. And we don't normally have what we call due diligence on these spotlight episodes. And don't worry, I'm not going to go into the whole begging for money spiel that I normally do. But there is some, I guess, relevant thing we have to discuss that is in no way related to Banjo-Tooie. And that is someone has solved the Season 7 contest for finding and listing in the correct order all of the name-dropped James Bond titles spoken aloud by me in last season's string of episodes. And the person who did this was Kongversation listener and occasional Kongversation caller, Brittle Nipples Kevin. So Brittle Nipples Kevin, this week he tweeted at DKVine and he said, "Hey, I think I figured it out." And he nailed it. Every single one he got exactly right, tied to the episode. So, congrats, Brittle Nipples Kevin, for finally solving one of my ridiculous contests. I have to say, if you're discouraged, if you were trying to figure out all of the James Bond titles in Season 7, there is still the missing episode found in the Kongversation Season 6, and nobody has solved that riddle, although Brittle Nipples says he is up to the challenge. But, yeah, congrats. You get a Pierce Brosnan Funko Pop, and I've already reached out, and, Brittle Nipples says they own Impossible Lair already, so they've opted to go for a physical copy of Sea of Thieves for the Xbox One. So, that will be sent your way really soon, Kevin. And for the curious, I will just read out the James Bond titles now. So these were spoken by me very awkwardly during the course of Kongversation. There were 36 in total. So really quick, I'm just gonna read them off. You can also find this list at dkvine.com. I did a news article about it, but in episode 701, I said Goldfinger. In episode 702, I said Never Say Never Again. 703 was For Your Eyes Only. 704 was GoldenEye. 705 was Thunderball. 706 was Forever in a Day. 707 was 007 in New York. 708 was The World Is Not Enough. 709 is Casino Royale. 710 is You Only Live Twice. 711 is Die Another Day. 712 is Colonel's Son. 713 is Dr. No. 714 is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. 715 is License Renewed. 716 is Spectre. 717 is Diamonds Are Forever. 718 is The Living Daylight. 719 is Tomorrow Never Dies. 720 is Moonraker. 721 is No Time to Die. 722 is Roll of Honor. 723 is A View to a Kill. 724 is Quantum of Solace. 725 is Carte Blanche. Mini 10 is By Royal Command. 726 is Octopussy. 727 is Win, Lose, or Die. 728 is No Deals, Mr. Bond. 729 is Death is Forever. 730 is The Property of a Lady. 731 is Double Shot. 732 is Nobody Lives Forever. 733 is Broken Claw. 734 is Solo. 735 From Russia with Love. And a partridge in a pear tree.
Wow. You know, you don't realize until they're all together like that how many of those aren't the well-known movie titles.
Yeah, there's novel titles in there, which really was the challenging aspect. So I'm really impressed that Kevin was able to solve this, and I'm impressed that there were no like false attempts, like where somebody would like maybe get most of them but maybe miss one or two. No, he got exactly what I said, title for title. So I'm just amazed it worked out. So we will never have to mention that contest again. I'm happy just to get some prizes out of my prize drawer because it's getting pretty full. All right. Well, congrats once again, Kevin. All right.
Impressive.
Banjo-Tooie. Yes, Banjo-Tooie. So let's jump right into it. If you haven't listened to our first episode, where we discuss the pre-release hype and the main characters and generally just everything that set this up, including the plot, go back and listen to that. But we're gonna dive into it, assuming you've already heard what we had to say there. So Spiral
just
Mountain.
like me playing Banjo-Tooie for the first time.
Yeah,
for context on that, you'll have to listen to the last episode.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if this is like a couple years down the road, like 720, I was doing my Bond titles. If it's 2024, and, you go back and listen to this, it's gonna be like Banjo-Tooie. You're gonna try to jump into the second part, and you're gonna be completely lost, so you have to start from the beginning. Spiral Mountain is where the game starts yet again. Of course, this time, Spiral Mountain has been decimated by Gruntilda's attack. Not only is Banjo's house a charred husk, but everything is just kind of broken and dour, and it's also overrun with enemies. Some of Gruntilda's new forces, which I always took these to be Minjella and Blobelda's baddies, not the ones that Gruntilda developed with Klungo, like the Gruntlings.
Yeah, but I kind of assume the same thing, because they don't look like the Gruntlings, which, they even reappear in Grunty's Revenge, so you kind of take them to be her specific fleet of henchmen.
Well, and considering that these henchmen, these baddies, like, spawned after they came in the Hag 1, and Grunty and Klungo had no like prep time or planning here, so I think they came out of the Hag 1, so it just makes sense.
I think they're seen coming out of the hatch, aren't they, in the intro?
Yeah. So
I buy them as, like, these are Grunty's sister's henchmen, because even though they don't look like the Gruntlings, they look like they're in the same ballpark of baddies, similar to, like, the DKC-2 Kremlings versus the DKC-1 Kremlings.
Yeah, I think that, it's even plausible that, maybe Klungo developed these baddies for Minjella and Blobelda once upon a time. Like, we don't really know when the sisters kind of went their separate ways in their but we know there is some level of contact between them, considering like all of the Grunty branded stuff around the Isle of Hag. So but you got the Uggers, which are the little green dudes who kind of take the place of Gruntlings in this game. And you've got the Grunty Dactyls. I think that's what they're called. I'm not quite sure on that, because so many, there's so many characters in Banjo-Tooie, and they all have names, but then the baddies are really what you kind of lose focus on, because you have all of these NPCs. This game is flush with NPCs. So I lose track of the drones, the baddies who kind of fall into the cracks a little bit, especially compared to like a Donkey Kong game where you don't have so many NPCs, so you really do focus on like the Kremling crew.
Yeah, and I mainly remember each Banjo enemy not by name but by the sound they make, I would say.
Yeah, it reminds me of a little video I think Matt did, I think preceding one of our Hall of Fame videos. It was like
Ugger's Fun Day, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you've got baddies in Spiral Mountain that aren't like the friendly training vegetables. So everything is, and even the music is slowed down in Spiral Mountain. So it's the same location. You can tread the same ground and then some. But it's kind of like I said last episode, it reminds me of Ocarina of Time when adult Link comes out of the Temple of Time and like the castle town is overrun with redeads. It's sort of like, oh, we're in the dark timeline now, except this is just 2 years after Banjo-Kazooie.
There's a really impressive attention to detail in it too. Like, I had rewatched the opening because I'm thinking, like, all of this dilapidation and like things just being destroyed, I'm thinking, well, the intro itself happens at night in the middle of a storm. They could have, like, cleverly obscured all the damage and just used the same model for, you know, the quote-unquote intact Spiral Mountain, the destroyed one, but no, looking at the intro, things that are later broken are intact. Like, they put in the effort. Yeah.
And, you know, you talk about attention to detail. I really feel like Banjo-Tooie works. I feel like it really does feel like not just a sequel to Banjo-Kazooie, but actually an extension and continuation of the game. For as much as we talk about how Stop and Swap was nixed and there is no actual data connection between the games, it does feel like an extension still of Tooie, and that really comes down to Spiral Mountain existing and having, like, the entrance to Grunty's lair there that you can still go into, even if you can't go further into the lair because the debris and boulders have crumbled down and blocked your path. It really does kind of sell this illusion that if you could just remove that, if you could just get through there, and obviously you can't, and people who have, edged past the boulders using codes, and Game Sharks back in the day, there's nothing back there, but, your brain can honestly believe that the entire layer is in there if you could just get past the boulder, and you could maybe, hop into Mad Monster Mansion or Click Clock Wood if you could only get through those boulders. And it really makes you feel like the Digger Tunnel that then extends into the Isle of Hags into Jinjo Village, that, it was always there in Kazooie, that, if you could have dug through the earth, you could have gotten there. And it just really feels like one large world. And so I think that's why it was vitally important for them to put Spiral Mountain as your starting point, rather than have, it would have been more practical maybe to have Jinjo Village be the starting hub this time around. But they were like, no, we need to revisit Spiral Mountain. We need to set up a connection to the first game and subvert it. It's make it a darker look. It's no longer Home Sweet Home. It's now basically invaded by the enemy, and you sort of have to set out to make things right, even if that isn't the actual crux or plot of the game.
Yeah, and they do a good job sort of refitting it as, it was a tutorial space in the original, but they do a good job refitting it as a tutorial space for the entirety of the first game.
Yeah.
And they used the dilapidation as sort of a vector to do that in some cases. Like, you didn't learn to fly in Spiral Mountain in the first game, but the bridge is now out on Grunty's lair, so you can't just walk over there, and Bottles isn't alive to fix it for you. So instead, there's a flight pad in the center of Spiral Mountain, and you use that to get into the mouth of Grunty's lair, which, that's another thing I wanted to say. Like, my favorite attention to detail in all of the stuff that's destroyed and, like, just show how Spiral Mountain has changed from the first game. This isn't even something that's necessarily, well, partially the caused by Grunty's sisters wrecking everything, but mainly just a direct result of the events of the first game, which you even see in the game's boot intro. Grunty's lair has gone dark. It doesn't have the, eerie magical glow of color around it anymore. All of the vegetation and cliffside around her lair isn't magically corrupted with these sort of sickly colors anymore. It's all kind of returned to nature.
Yeah. Which, we know from Grunty's Revenge that what we know as Grunty's lair was originally where the Jinjos lived. There's a face of King Jingaling that Grunty tore down. So I like to think, that like her just presence, her evil, has just like physically manifested, sort of the same way that the worlds themselves, the entrances to the worlds physically manifest outside the little portals where you can access them. Much like just Grunty's presence is also affecting the environment, and because she's underneath the boulder and Klungo is, presumably he goes back into the lair at night. But, I don't know if he's, because I think with Grunty's Revenge it established that he wasn't just there for 2 years trying to push the boulder off. He would take breaks. He built a robot body for her, and
he's got to use Lago every now and then.
Yeah, and I like to think that Brentilda still lives there, but she's like taken over the master bedroom. Like she's fully moved in at this point.
Yeah, since you can't access the remainder of her lair, but it did sell the illusion to me, like, oh, if I could only move that rock, every world from the last game is still there, everything is still there. I could definitely imagine, like, she just took up the residence in there, and nobody else is using the space.
And, considering how many characters that lived in those worlds relocated in the 2 years after that, or at least are visiting the Isle of Hags locations, I like to think there is a lot of back and forth. Like, these characters are now just free to roam. Grunty's lair, Brentilda is just like waving them on, and maybe there's like a back entrance that Klungo and Grunty don't know about. I don't know. But, yeah, you mentioned a flight pad, and that really fulfilled a dream I had with the original Banjo-Kazooie, and sort of like getting that cannon unlocked in Super Mario 64 and getting to shoot yourself to the top of the castle. I wanted to fly in Spiral Mountain. And you get to do that, and not only do you get to do that, but you also get to see locations you didn't get to visit in Banjo-Kazooie, because they didn't exist in Banjo-Kazooie, but this game sells the illusion that they were always there, like the cave above the waterfall. And there's also another cave that you can blow up above the stumps, those tree stumps. And, well, I don't want to belabor this, but, I'm going to be doing the Stop and Swap episode with Steve from off of Rare Gamer, but these two caverns in Spiral Mountain are where 2 out of the 3 Banjo-Kazooie game cartridges, the googly-eyed Banjo-Kazooie game cartridges that house the so-called Stop and Swap items, are located. And so this Spiral Mountain is where you can get the pink and blue question mark eggs. And if you're more familiar with the XBLA version of Banjo-Tooie, which was also the version included with Rare Replay, those would be the bronze and silver question mark eggs. But originally they were the pink and blue, as you saw at the end of Banjo-Kazooie.
I am now thinking way too hard about when those cartridges manifested. As you said, this is the first game where we've been able to get up there. Was there like a recursion where there was a Banjo-Kazooie cartridge up there the entire time in the last game? Did it come out when Grunty's sisters tore through the Spiral Mountain? Speaking of which, something I wanted to kind of call attention to before we moved on from Spiral Mountain. So I mentioned things change in between the game's intro and the end of the intro, and one of the notable things is Grunty's lair itself gets a little bit more dilapidated. Already mentioned the bridge breaking, but there's damage to the lair itself, and one of Grunty's eyes has popped out in the lair, which I love that they make that a running. It's echoing what will be a running gag through the entire game with Grunty.
Yeah, it's foreshadowing a little bit with her own eyeball problems, considering she is but a skeleton with some flesh clinging
You get a lot of mileage out of that squishy eyeball sound with it, too.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I think at this point, Rare was still using sound effects libraries, like, they didn't have the full-on Foley's, like, department that, like, Robin Beelan and the sound team use now, but...
They definitely did they recorded their own voices and stuff like that, and recorded some of their own sound effects, but I think for more general stuff, you do catch library sounds, especially when they're used between games.
Yeah.
Star Fox Adventures is where I notice a lot of them.
Yeah, I think it wasn't really until the Xbox era where they really got into just, like, making their own sounds, and they had the facility, because like, Manor Park, when they moved from Manor House and, you know, the barns to the more, state-of-the-art campus, Manor Park, and, I want to say that was, 2001? That they moved to Manor Park, but I think Banjo-Tooie's development would have been during that, so they definitely wouldn't have had the setup that they would later have. Could be wrong. I'm trying to remember back to the days of reading Rare's website and seeing about their move, which was kind of like a minor story for me at the time, because I'm like, okay, you're moving, but you're still making games. Tell me about the games. And now I find it interesting as an adult. Like, oh, you know, it's a completely different place that Rare made something like Viva Pinata versus where they made the original Donkey Kong Country. They actually made that game in a fucking barn, but the barns at Rare now are just named in tribute to the fact that Rare used to make games in barns. Yeah, but then I do want to say though that there was one little bit of, like, immersion breaking that really sold that you weren't playing Banjo-Kazooie, and that was the noticeable frame rate issues in Spiral Mountain in Banjo-Tooie versus Spiral Mountain in Banjo-Kazooie. And, you know, Tooie's frame rate issues on the N64, you know, it's been talked about. I never really had a big issue with it. It never really felt like, oh, this game is... like, it's not cyberpunk at bad. It's pretty standard for the era, especially on the N64, and I never, as a kid, or I guess a teenager, when I first played Banjo-Tooie, I never noticed it. I never noticed it until it was pointed out to me, and I was like, okay, but it doesn't really bother me. And I don't know.
I guess how I'd describe it is I certainly notice it, but first of all, it's the most obvious if you move from Banjo-Kazooie to Banjo-Tooie, because you have a one-to-one comparison.
Right. That's why I brought up Spiral Mountain, because that is your one-to-one comparison.
But I'd say it's very low, and really probably lower than... I'd say probably lower than average for an N64 game, at least like a lot of the ones I played. But it's at least consistent in how low it is, so that generally I've noticed when I played Tooie, there will be a sort of... because generally I'll play it after having played the first one. Like, I'll play them back to back. I will notice the frame rate at first, but the more I play the game, my eyes will just acclimate to it. Because it's mostly consistent, even if it's only like 15 or 20 frames a second. It's not like dipping out constantly or catching itself back up. So I don't feel like it is constantly jarring me throughout my play experience. It's mainly just if I put it down, pick something else back up, and then pick Banjo-Tooie up. And I also don't think it has too much of a detrimental effect on the gameplay, which I think is important. There are some games that I feel like absolutely have to have a high frame rate. Like, I'll throw for an example, like, most of the, like, post-Sonic Unleashed Sonic games, if they're below 60 frames a second, I notice because I feel like I have less time to register my surroundings and react. But
yeah,
Banjo is kind of a... You can see enough of your environment at once, and Banjo moves slowly enough anyway that it doesn't really feel like I'm out of step with how the game is moving.
Yeah. And so, while I'm more understanding of complaints about the frame rate than I was 20 years ago when I remember scoffing at IGN for not giving Banjo-Tooie a perfect review because they were complaining about the frame rate. I do think it's not really an issue in so much that the game is perfectly playable and you don't really notice, and it's only really noticeable if you jump straight from Banjo-Kazooie into Banjo-Tooie. But, leaving Spiral Mountain behind, you go through the digger tunnel of the Hag 1, and these digger tunnels are, well, the digger, like, the path of the Hag 1 is reoccurrent throughout the entire Isle of Hags. But, the actual tunnels itself, this is where you will encounter Klungo in these little, like, mini boss fights in the overworld. And there are 3 different battles with Klungo. And I believe they are, like, randomized, which one you're gonna get.
Yeah, the order of them is randomized. I think the difficulty scales based on how far you are in the game. Like, his aim with his potions gets a little bit better each time. Yeah. But it can be the one where he goes giant, the one where he turns invisible, or the one where he splits himself into copies. Yes. I always forget about the copy one for some reason. But yeah, they're just nice little fights and a nice little tribute to all of those who, like me, who wished that you could fight Klungo in the original game. But as we mentioned when we discussed Klungo, and we're not going to really go over all of the characters we already discussed on part 1. So yeah, Klungo has a face turn. Klungo, through his constant beatings from Banjo and Kazooie, and he like physically bears the bruises. It's not just like you fight Klungo, he goes away, you fight him again, he goes away, you fight him again, he goes away. Yeah, I didn't expect the graphicness of him getting beaten. Like, I read the line when you shoo him away at the end of the fight in Spiral Mountain where he asks Grunty to beat him with her broomstick, and I didn't expect him to show up next with a black eye and bruises. Yeah, and I my impression was that Grunty was beating him, but I also, like, with the passage of time, I'm wondering if those are also, like, reflective of the fact that Banjo and Kazooie have been beating. Like, it's just, like, the full-on, like, abuse he's taking from all sides of this conflict. Mm-hmm. And he's just the punching bag for everybody's frustrations. And Klungo starts questioning his life choices and the fact that he's kind of shackled himself to this monster, this abusive witch who doesn't really respect him, and he's starting to wonder, like, should I have made some different life choices along the way? And, you know, considering Klungo hasn't really done anything overtly heinous besides, like, make Grunty's monster army and make her contraptions and stuff, like, he's Grunty more complicit than actively, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like Darth Vader before the prequels. It's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, he served the Emperor, but you don't really see him, like, committing the genocide. And then, you know, you go back to the prequels, it's like, oh no, wait, he slaughtered all the children in the Jedi Temple. Oh, yeah, you probably shouldn't have been redeemed so fucking quick. But, well, now you've got me curious about what happened to... well, no, Tootie's in Minecraft. Tootie's fine. Anyway, so, yeah, Klungo... And like we said, Klungo's eventual turn to the light side, it's never undone. He's still basically a good guy, or at least a neutral guy in Nuts and Bolts. So it's the great thing about having
an acknowledged continuity that spans several years. It's that you get to grow and age with these characters, and you get to see them change.
It's nice because Tooie kind of builds the foundation of who Klungo is, even. He's barely in the first game. He's just kind of like an Igor figure, and at the end, this game sets him up in a way more active role. We get more of what he's actively like, and choices Tooie makes inform him for every other appearance he makes. Even like the music for this boss battle becomes Klungo's theme. Like it shows up in Nuts and Bolts as the background music of Hero Klungo Saves to World.
I like how you made sure to call it to World. Yeah, but yeah,
that's not very 2008 or anything.
No, Klungo's great though. Klungo, they took this weird character that certain fans clung to, and they did right by him. And it wasn't like this like Harley Quinn situation where this character is really popular. Let's just start portraying her as a hero. Like it's like Klungo was basically a nothing character that fans were just very interested in. So they were like, all right, let's give him a little bit more depth. And yeah, I love it.
He's great. This boss fight sets the tone for the rest of Banjo-Tooie, in that Banjo-Tooie is going to have a lot of boss fights. The first thing you do in the game after leaving Spiral Mountain is fight a boss.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, you know, we've actually discussed this because Jeff Onen, our friend Jeff, DK Vine editor Jeff, he started this new series on the DK Vine forum called the Kongversation, where every month he is asking people on the forum to compare different things in the Donkey Kong universe and rank them. And the first topic he chose were first world bosses in Donkey Kong universe platform games. And controversially, he picked Konga from Banjo-Kazooie, and people were like, well, is Konga really a boss? Because does Banjo-Kazooie really have defined boss battles? And ultimately the decision was made to go with it. But it is true, like Banjo-Kazooie you can make the argument that certain objectives in each world in Banjo-Kazooie could qualify as a boss fight. You know, Konga, Nipper, the Muty Snippets, the
Boss Boombox.
Boss Boombox, of course, is the one we always go to. But
the one that literally has boss in the name.
Right, yeah. But, you know, it's never really defined with any fanfare, whereas Banjo-Tooie, boss fights are actually one of the selling points of the game. Like, hey, this game has boss fights now.
They're ultra defined. Like, they all get unique theme music that's usually like a sinister arrangement of the level they're in, which I think DK64 started, but I think this kind of cemented it as like a Kirkopian standard of, like, this kind of even turned into, I have a lot of memories of this because of the old website. I don't know if you recall, vgmusic.com.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that kind of became like a whole subgenre of music on that site, which was to take a song from a game and remix it like a Grant Kirkhope boss fight score.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's some memories I haven't thought about for a while.
That site's still up. But there's the jokey boss subtitles for everybody. Which I think was meant to be a Zelda parody, but I didn't get that at the time because I hadn't played Ocarina or Majora's Mask. I just thought it was funny.
It's also something that was carried forward into Ukulele, too.
Right.
Yeah, so, but boss fights are a big draw for this game.
And you can replay them. That's another big new feature of Tooie. The ability to replay things from a chapter select of sorts.
Yeah. So, Klungo serves as sort of the little boss of the Isle of Hags before, of course, you fight Gruntilda. But let's talk about the Isle of Hags, Cameron, because this is where, you know, I think you spend the most amount of time in Banjo-Tooie just trekking from world to world. And of course, it's full of its own secrets and wonders and things to see. And when you arrive, so there's some controversy. I should say this up front, and this is something that even DK Vine is occasionally divided on, and that's whether or not Spiral Mountain is part of the Isle of Hags, or if they're supposed to be separate locations. And the game is actually very, very obtuse when it comes to this. They're kind of treated as separate, but then, you know, sometimes they're lumped together. We know they're separated by a digger tunnel in this game, but that digger tunnel would then have to be like underneath the ocean. I don't know. I waffle on this. It depends on how I wake up in the morning and what mood I'm in. But I know you I think subscribe to the notion that it is on the Isle of Hags.
I think it is, and I mean, I'll say first off, like there's an overhead view of the Isle of Hags that you can see in game in the abyss of Cloud Cuckoo Land. Mm-hmm. But I feel like most of it, aside from like a handful of relevant landmarks, is too muddy to make out, and I wouldn't concretely say Spiral Mountain's visible on it. And I know another... I mean, primarily, I believe they're on the same landmass because that digger tunnel does not look very long or very deep, and I think it's much, much funnier if it's just literally on the opposite side of the cliff wall. I've seen it argued that, like, it's supporting evidence they're not on the same location because of the way that another unique thing Tooie does compared to Kazooie is the text descriptors that pop up whenever you enter a new room.
Yeah.
That most locations on the Isle of Hags say Isle of Hags, subtitle like Jinjo Village. And
yeah.
Spiral Mountain is just Spiral Mountain. I'd argue that's that way to not spoil the Isle of Hags on your first visit, because if that was the first thing you saw when you booted the game, when you loaded up in Spiral Mountain, why does it say Isle of Hags? What is this? I've never been there. Why does it say Isle of Hags Spiral Mountain? It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So I don't put too much weight on that.
I'm relatively agnostic to this debate, which is weird because I get very passionate about some really stupid stuff in the Donkey Kong universe. But I would be happy with any which way. Part of me, it will always be attached to the idea that Spiral Mountain is maybe part of the Northern Cremosphere. And part of me is like, yeah, sure, it's on the Isle of Hags, whatever. Part of me agrees with you that it's funnier that there's just this grand witch island on the other side of Spiral Mountain, that is actually part of. And part of me thinks it's funnier if the digger tunnel is underneath the ocean, and it's supposed to like portray miles and miles of tunnel, similar to how Donkey Kong 64's map screen, or excuse me, overworld is really just like a reduced representation of Donkey Kong Island. So you know what, like you're not gonna have me like get all red faced in this debate.
Yeah.
I'm open to anything really. Like Log only knows I've had to acknowledge changing my perception of things that I held long and true. Like you know, it was a big deal when I had to accept that no, the modern Donkey Kong is the grandson of Cranky Kong. However, Cranky Kong did raise him, and he's still Donkey Kong Jr., damn it. So, you know, I think, like, I've alternated back and forth on this point a couple times over the past 20 years. And at this point, it's just like, maybe this will be shored up when we eventually get another Banjo game. Or maybe it'll just be kept delightfully vague to let fans read into it however they want.
I mean, next entry, we immediately after have a debate where Showdown Town is, so I wouldn't count on definitive answers. But,
oh yeah, Cameron, we're gonna have a slugfest on that one.
But yeah, this is not my... the relocation of Spiral Mountain is... I think you have enough leeway to kind of believe what you want to believe. I think it is on the same landmass, but that's not going to be my... I'm not going to make a mountain out of that dead hamster man hill.
See, I was going to say, this isn't my hill to die on unless I'm Bottles. then it will be exactly the hill I'll die on. No, I mean, right now, I think I just lean more towards Spiral Mountain not being part of the Isle Hags, because I think that's funnier, but I'm open to whatever.
It's also just cleaner if, like, the banjo stuff is in one specific place. I guess.
Yeah, because
I compartmentalize everything.
And also, where was Blobelda and Mingella for the past 2 years if they were on the same island? Like, yo, what the fuck? Why didn't you come with your digger, or why didn't you just fly in on broomstick? Like, what are you doing? Your sister's under a fucking boulder and her hapless minion. Anyway, the Isle of Hags. Let's just talk about that independent of any Spiral Mountain chat. The Isle of Hags is an ambitious overworld. And I think in that ambition, it's kind of overlooked by a lot of fans because, you know, you've got these iconic locations in the Donkey Kong universe. You've got Donkey Kong Island and Crocodile Isle and Spiral Mountain. And I would say that, ironically, for me, what the Isle of Hags brings to mind the most is the Northern Cremosphere, in that it doesn't really have that distinguishing, like, visual hook of a giant character face to really, like, sell you, like, this place is identifiable, and you can recognize it in a silhouette. The Northern Cremosphere is just this huge landmass that's, like, if you silhouetted it, it would just be a bunch of darkness. And so would the Isle of Hags. Although the Isle of Hags does have a shape from up above, you know, you don't get any of that when you're actually exploring it. And it's interconnected. It functions more like a real place.
That is the most impressive part of it to me, is that it feels like a hub world that's a lived-in place by multiple residents, not just Grunty's home where she's set up a bunch of Disneyland dark rides in her residence. Or, or the Donkey Kong Island and Crocodile Isle and DK64, where the scale is kind of too wacky for me to believe it.
From what I gather of the Isle of Hags, it is basically run by the Winky Bunions, but there's no government set up, so you have these independent kingdoms and organizations that are running things in their own little pockets of the Isle of Hags. So it's not like this totalitarian dictatorship by witchcraft.
I think they rule it in so much as, like, you stay out of their way and they'll leave you alone, and they're evil, powerful witches, so you have to do what they say if they so whim it, but they'd be hands off otherwise.
Yeah, like they might run through Jinjo Village and completely murder an entire family of Jinjos with their monstrous drill, but, you know, you could still be off on the side here in your Mayan kingdom or your dinosaur land, and they'll basically leave you alone.
Yeah, they're occasionally stopping by to murder people, but you're not trying to consult them to pass laws. Essentially,
it's like it is this kind of. Honestly, I hate to say this, it's kind of like a libertarian paradise, the Isle of Hags, where it's just like a free-for-all event. Like, whatever you want goes. We're just gonna make up our own fucking bullshit, and all the infrastructure will be down to, like, people and businesses, and I'll say this, it wouldn't be my ideal place to live in the Rare Archipelago. It would be pretty far down the list, actually, of where I'd want to spend any significant time for realsies. But in a video game context, it absolutely works.
Yeah, it depends on if I have a jiggy to just get Banjo and Kazooie to do whatever I want.
Yeah, right? I mean, how come they've never been conned by somebody who says they have a jiggy, and then they do all this work for them, and then it turns out, gotcha. The Isle of Hags, it's hard for me to think of it in, like, by like pulling back and viewing it as one lump sum. I remember, like, the individual pockets of the Isle of Hags, like the Wooded Hollow, or the Quagmire, or, places like that, but it is basically fragmented like that, because it's on the N64, it's not this huge open world sandbox, even if it's presented like it is. That's the interesting thing about what they were able to, pull off. I mean, it's sort of like running around Hyrule in Ocarina of Time, or Termina in Majora's Mask. Like, it is this vaguely interconnected place that feels like a real living environment, but it's in a 3D platformer.
Yeah, I believe it, and I believe it enough for it to work, and it works pretty well. With how they, like, fairly logically cordon things off, even, with, like, some exceptions. I think the biggest cheat is Hailfire Peaks' lobby.
Right.
Or entrance. But Witchyworld is behind a chain link fence in the overworld, where you just kind of treat it as, this is, like, my kids want to go to Witchyworld. I go up the street past the mine, and it's right there where they'll let you in if that hasn't been shut down.
Yeah, and Jolly Roger's Lagoon is through a door, and on the other side is this little coastal town. And there are obvious cheats to get around the fact that it's not actually all like one massive game environment.
I mean, I don't think Mrs. Boggy, like, climbed the cliffside with her hands to get to Witchyworld from Jigiwi's temple.
Yeah,
but,
right. and of course there is elements of fast travel through the Isle of Hags. Not only do you have Jam Jar's silos that you can use, but you have Chuffy. Chuffy the train, which we'll talk about Chuffy in Glitter Gulch Mine, I guess. But, it even feels like it has more infrastructure than something like Grunty's Lair did, where you just hop into the correctly colored cauldron and pop out the other side, which, it's fine because it's a magical location and you want magical, gimmicks but
I do like this system more, even if it is less organic for you to pull up a menu, just because the deeper you get into Banjo-Kazooie, the more kind of convoluted the warp system becomes.
Yes.
And this is kind of, you know from the start what you're getting with with Jam Jar's silos. In
Banjo-Kazooie, I would just mostly skip the cauldrons entirely and just trek through all of Grunty's lair, because that was just easier. But with Tooie, I definitely would take the shortcuts, because it was just the simpler route to go. But yeah, I like the Isle. I think Tooie's success hangs on the Isle of Hags as a overworld, and it works. I buy it as a real ecosystem of characters and life, and it has the same problem that Donkey Kong 64's Donkey Kong Island has, in that it feels barren in places. But the upshot to that is we've never visited the Isle of Hags on, say, the Super Nintendo, so we know, like, we don't know if it's supposed to be portrayed as this lush paradise like DK Island is. So the fact that it is barren, you're like, oh, did the witches, like, deforest this place? Or has that always just been this, like, rocky, windswept, area for the most part?
You're also pretty regularly going into people's residences, and they don't just magically pop out of the ground like they do in DK64. Like,
yeah.
You visit King Jingling's palace, you have to go through Bottle's living quarters to even reach the next area. Honeybee has her hive. Like, it feels lived in, it's just that everybody is staying indoors, which also makes sense because the Ugas and Grunty Dactyls are running amok.
I thought you were going to say because there's a pandemic, because that's how conditioned I am to why you would stay indoors. Yeah, like, I think, like, the Idle Hags, it would be hard to really revisit it, because the downside to having such a fully fleshed out environment is that you've fully fleshed it out. You've seen it. You've gone everywhere. Where, you know, Donkey Kong Island, you can always have this, like, nebulous expansion, like, here's this little area of Donkey Kong Island we've never visited because we don't really know what the scale of Donkey Kong Island is. It's whatever we need it to be. But with the Isle of Hags, this doesn't feel like DK64 where it's like reduced from scale.
It does feel immutable in a way Donkey Kong Island doesn't.
Yeah. So I like the weird thing is, as much as I really admire the Isle of Hags, I don't know if you could ever actually revisit it in a new Banjo-Kazooie platformer. Obviously, you know, as a set piece in something like Banjo Pilot, it works, but it you know, to come back to the Isle of Hags, I don't see how you would do that without throwing Banjo-Tooie under the chuffy.
Just slap a pile of rocks in front of that entrance and tease people with it and call it a day.
Throw a digger tunnel on the other side of Spiral Mountain and see what's on that side. Alright, let's talk about the worlds. The actual worlds of Banjo-Tooie. And we'll start with the start. Mayahem Temple. And, you know, it's weird to me how, you know, Donkey Kong 64 was developed by a different team than the Banjo team. Although, you know, some people on that team pitched in to get Donkey Kong 64 out the door in time for Holiday 99. But it's funny to me just to see how Rare would occasionally, like, stumble upon the same ideas at the same time. So Banjo-Tooie has a Mayan civilization, or a pseudo-Mayan civilization, as its first world. Donkey Kong 64 had a world as a second world called Angry Aztec. However, whereas Banjo-Tooie, I can plausibly see this as a Mayan civilization, or like inspired by the Mayans. Donkey Kong 64, I don't know what was going on there, but it wasn't an Aztec civilization.
It seemed Angry Aztec, despite the name, is kind of, I think, a general purpose desert motif.
The Aztecs weren't even in the desert. That's
like, yeah.
Like, I feel like Donkey Kong 64, they wanted to do an Egyptian pastiche, but Banjo-Kazooie got to it first. So they were like, what if we call it another ancient civilization? And it has to be alliterative. Angry Aztec. But you've got, like, scarabs, and you've got, like, deserts, and it's just, it has nothing to do with the Aztecs. Even, like, the llama, I think, doesn't really apply to the region. It's just a mess. Like, so much of TK64 is a mess. But Mayahem Temple is, as a cartoony, like, offshoot civilization inspired by the Mayans, it works. It works for what it is. Obviously it's not going to be a cultural one-to-one, but it does it, like, break my brain the way Angry Aztec does. And it's obviously compared a lot to Mumbo's Mountain, being the first world of the game and being this kind of sort of like Indiana Jones-esque like trek through like, ruins and not really jungle, but you know what I mean. But it is so much bigger and more involved than Mumbo's Mountain, and that really, I think, sold to me right away what Banjo-Tooie was going to be. And that Banjo-Tooie wasn't just another Banjo-Kazooie game. It felt like, here is the continuation of the first Banjo-Kazooie, and we're picking right up after Click Clock Wood. Like, Mayahem Temple feels like the world that would have come after Click Clock Wood, and that everything's gotten bigger and more complicated and harder. And it really, like, especially since, you know, you have all your moves from the original Banjo-Kazooie, and you're just continually adding to that with what Jam Jars teaches you.
Yeah, and, like, thematically, it's adjacent to Mumbo's Mountain, but Mumbo's Mountain, the, like, ruins, trappings of it extended to, like, a couple minor set pieces, like, the Stonehenge area and, like Juju in front of Mumbo's. This is a ruins world. This is a full embrace of that aesthetic top to bottom.
Yeah, it's a civilization. Yeah, that's right. Like, it's a couple of civilizations, actually, because you've got the Moggies, which are the cat-like people. And I've seen it argued that they're not actually called Moggies. Moggy is just British slang.
It's what Target Zen calls them, whether or not that's their actual species name.
It works as a species name, as a kind of civilization name, I guess. But they're various cat folk who, I guess, worship Target Zan as their god. And it's interesting to me to see all of these godlike beings coming in to the Rare Archipelago, because you've got Target Zan, obviously...
Specifically the god of target shooting.
Right. It's so stupid. Like, it's one of those things where it's mocking the conventions of a platformer. Not ever to the same extent that Conker's Bad Fur Day would a couple of months later, but it does feel like, yeah, god of target shooting, because we're target shooting in this game. And but yeah, like, I know Donkey Kong Country Returns is not a Rare game, and I know even though they're both part of the DKU as we define it, there's no correlation there, but it reminds me a little bit of Tiki Tong, who is this Polynesian pastiche who is actually from another dimension, who the Tiki Tak tribe worship as a god. And it just makes me wonder, is Target Zan from the same realm as Tiki Tong, and they just like intrude upon our dimension and have people worship that, like have these civilizations spring up in their honor? Like, oh, I want to be a Mayan god. Okay, I'll be this Polynesian god over here. Okay. That's just my own fanon, but I like it. But yeah, you got the Moggies, the cat people, and then you've got the Stonies, who are these anthropomorphic stone like golems. I don't even know, like, really how to describe them other than little stout stone things.
They're so entrenched as like a species that exists within the Banjo verse that the first transformation in the game is a Stony, and you have to dissect what that means.
Yeah, it's interesting how the first game went with like transforming you either into a little version of an enemy, or another creature that you encounter that's familiar to us in our reality, the reality of the real world, where you're a termite banjo, or you're a walrus banjo. Like, the weirdest it got was pumpkin banjo, and of course washing machine banjo. But here it immediately like goes bizarre with stony banjo, and that only means something in the context of Banjo-Tooie. So, I've heard complaints that the transformations of Banjo-Tooie aren't as fun as the transformations in Banjo-Kazooie, and I can see that to an extent. I think some of them are fun, but I feel like as a whole, transformations kind of took more of a back seat, because Banjo-Tooie, I think everything had to take a back seat because the game is so huge and there's so much going on that like you never really get like the time to really put a spotlight on something. Like, now I'm transforming into this, and at least from my perspective, it never felt like as big of a deal in Banjo-Tooie, because you also had to worry about like controlling Mumbo and doing Mumbo's things and influencing the environment that way. And then you had all of these new moves as Banjo and Kazooie, and you split up, and it always just felt like it was crowded out a little bit, the transformations. So in that sense, it's fine that they're not as set piece heavy or as impressive, that they're more kind of low key affairs like Stony Banjo and Snowball Banjo. And
weirdly, thinking on this a little bit, now that I've kind of had to analyze it, I think, like, I like the transformations in Banjo-Tooie to varying degrees. I think Stony might actually be pretty high up there for me, which is weird because of all the transformations in the game, they're probably the closest in spirit to something like the pumpkin from the first game, where there's not much of, like, distinct, like, gameplay feel application to them. Like, it's just an object smaller than Banjo that has fewer abilities and it doesn't have like the ability to like cling. It's just smaller. It doesn't have the ability to cling to surfaces like the termite or fly around like the bee. But a thing unique to the Stony transformation is just the nice thing you can do with it, aside from using it to get the handful of collectibles it's required for, which is you can speak to the Stonies. They all have unique dialogue that you can only understand when you're a Stony.
Yeah.
Usually gameplay hints. Sometimes it's just fun to talk to. Sometimes they're just fun to talk to. Like, there's some trainers in the kickball stadium who are supposed to be like washed up players who give you hints, and they make a joke out of it where at least one of them will always give you a useless hint. And it'll just be a funny exchange. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of any game, really, is a useless dialogue exchange. So that makes me very on board with the Stonies. And also, when you're not a Stony, you get a mix of like gibberish dialogue and jokes embedded in gibberish dialogue, which I also love.
Yeah, this is definitely a game, and I think it's one of the first games in the DKU where it is just so dialogue heavy, and you want to see all of the options and all of the variations. Banjo-Kazooie didn't have it to this extent, and it did really feel like, I brought up the Zelda games on the N64 before, but Tooie really does feel like a weird, like, platforming counterpart to those, in between like the overworld and just all of the NPCs you can talk to and how you influence their lives for better or for worse. It does really feel just like a living, breathing world, and that's really sold, I think, in Mayhem Temple, especially compared to some of the other worlds, like Gulch Mine. It just feels so vibrant and full of life, and that extends to some of the more notable NPC characters as well, like Chief Blodazin and Officer Uno Gopez. The fact that I remember their names, and the fact that if you go to dkvine.com/Blodazin, you will find a multi-year-old petition that DK Vine launched, directed towards then Microsoft Studios, now Xbox Studios, to have a 9-part video game series starring Chief Blodazin. Why? We have no reason. It's not like that was a particular character that we really, wanted to champion, but we remembered him, and we were like, would I play 9 games about Chief Blodazin? Hell yes, I would. So, dkvine.com/Blodazin. The petition is still going. We're trying to get 1 million signatures to prove to Xbox Studios that all 9 games will be at least 1 million sellers. So, with Game Pass, they need ideas. So, check it out and lend your support. But got Chief Blodazin, Officer Uno Gopez, who of course are Moggies. But then you've got Bovina the cow, and Bovina, I'm not sure where she fits into this civilization, or if she's just this character who's living on the outskirts, but is still like, because she's wearing the toga that I guess is supposed to be representative of this area of Mayahem Temple, but she's not a Moggy, she's not affiliated with the Stonies per se. I'm not really sure what she's doing except growing maize.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what her, like, the genesis of her creation is, but I like that she feels like one of these characters like Konga who well, will see paid to this exact thing, but you can transplant her somewhere else in a future game.
Yeah.
Easily.
But I also like that, too, like, you've got these NPCs who can't readily be pegged down as, like, you belong to this faction, you're a bad person, you're a good person. It does feel like there could just be people living here who aren't really involved in any of this nonsense, but maybe she likes the area of Mayahem Temple. Maybe she's a corn enthusiast, and that's the most fertile soil, and so she's just kind of like living a life without worshipping Target Zan or concerning herself with all of this, all these kickball tournaments. I don't know, but Bovina's an interesting character that I don't really pay enough attention to, honestly, because she can't be easily pegged down one side of the conflict or another. And then you've got Slumber, the snake, who... It's interesting that Slumber came about 1.5 years after Histamine from Conker's Pocket Tales. Just the same kind of, not even a pun, just the throwing multiple S's into a snake name. But Slumber is you gotta be very sneaky to get the jiggy, walk very slowly kind of challenge.
It's a challenge that comes up multiple times in the game, including twice in this world.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, Mayhem Temple is just, it's, I think, a really good introduction to Banjo-Tooie. Would I say it's my favorite world? Absolutely not, but I think it works. Out of all the worlds, it works the best to be the first world, because
it's an excellent primer for the rest of the game without overwhelming you, I would say.
Yeah, and it could be overwhelming considering, like I said, it feels like it's just the next world after Click Clock Wood. That itself could be like, whoa, like, I'm just getting thrown in the deep end here. But it definitely does kind of lay out the groundwork for how Tooie will work. And you've also, I find it interesting that, you've got the code chamber in the first world, Mayhem Temple. So, obviously, Treasure Trove Cove had the sandcastle in Banjo-Kazooie, and that became a central location that you would revisit time and again for the Cheeto codes and all the other codes that you would both uncover and not uncover, because of course the sandcastle would come into play originally for Stop and Swap in the N64 games, and ultimately that was the case in the XBLA versions. But here it's the code chamber where you use the targeting mechanic, the egg targeting mechanic, and instead of pounding the ground, you shoot eggs at it, which For me, it never felt as satisfying inputting codes in the code chamber as the sandcastle. I like the sandcastle as a location more, but I think it made more sense for them to do it this way and to have it be in the first world. Although I would think that they would have put it in the Isle of Hags as kind of like a hub you could visit, like Heggies or Master Jiggy Wiggies. It's interesting that they kind of hide it in the first world instead.
I do think at least this is has more logic to it than the Sandcastle in Treasure Trove Cove. Like, I buy the idea of, like, an ancient ruin with a bunch of letters arranged in the first world, a lot more organic seeming than a sandcastle in the second world that you have to drain the water out of every single time you visit, and then smash letters on the floor of a sandcastle, and I'm not sure what the connection is.
Sure. I feel like the sandcastle is kind of this thing where they came up with the Jiggy puzzle first, and then they said, hey, we could use this for other things. Whereas I feel like the code chamber was devised with the purpose of actually using for codes. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but it does remind me of kind of like the progression of things from the Banjo-Kazooie series to Ukulele, and how Platonic was like, hey, a lot of the stuff that we created for Banjo-Kazooie was done kind of in an inorganic way. What if we actually set out to have thematically appropriate items, and rather than just having this mishmash of music-related stuff and jigsaw puzzles and but the code chamber feels like kind of the same thought process. Like, okay, what if we set out from the start to do this properly? So
absolutely,
in that sense, the code chamber works better. But I think I just have a lot more of a nostalgic fondness for the sandcastle, even if it's complete nonsense. So let's talk about Target Zan. Target Zan, the boss, he's not my favorite boss of Banjo-Tooie, not the most memorable boss. And sometimes I question the wisdom of having the very first boss of the game be in like the shooting mode where you hold Kazooie like a gun. Like, I know this was right after the massive success of GoldenEye and Perfect Dark came out earlier that year. It's just weird in your 3D platformer to have this be the first proper boss. Klungo notwithstanding. It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with it, and it works just fine. But as a whole, I think the whole shooting areas in Banjo-Tooie, just never gelled for me quite like I wanted them to.
I think generally my only problem with Target Zan is that him and his temple are the high point of the shooting mechanic for me.
Yeah.
Just because they're the only portion of that highlights that mechanic that isn't under strict time pressure.
Right. Yeah, I think to Glitter Gulch Mines.
I think that Target Zan and his temple were kind of intended to ease you into this mechanic for when it would come up later, but instead I kind of just wish everything was as forgiving.
Yeah, I understand it from that perspective. Again, it's just weird to me that would be your first boss, to have it be to this mechanic that isn't really used all that often, and it is what it is. I think Target Zan's a fine boss, but he's kind of like Juju a little bit, in that he's just this column, this column that you shrink down until it's defeated. And as far as the bosses go, he's probably ironically near the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to my favorites. I don't even have much to say about him. It's just, he's a target shooting god, and you defeat him. So, just checking in with the live stream really quick. Gibbon says, for the Kongversation, the aforementioned DK Vine forum feature, check it out now. You have through, I believe, Christmas to get in your votes. It says, for the Kongversation, I had to go look up a video of Target Zan because I'd utterly forgotten him. Ouch. Oh, and Ray Day Pinball says, excuse me, the Tiptoe Challenge is in Pterodactyl Land. Different world.
As soon
LOL.
as those words left my lips, I knew I'd need to circle back to it. So, yeah, that's something I did want to touch on, is Mayhem Temple does, like I said, it's a primer for the rest of the game, and it does dip your toes into the cross-pollination of the worlds in this game. Mm. But Mayhem Temple does it in a way that, at least for this specific task for Chief Bloodison that takes you into Pterodactyl Land, you might not even realize that's what you're doing when it happens.
Yeah. That's it's cool that you really do, like, you get your first taste of a larger world, literally, in that you get to... Did it ever freak you out? Like, I've discussed quite a bit recently my phobia of boundary breaking and going further than I'm supposed to in a game. Did it mess with your head when you would step into a world you haven't even visited properly yet?
A lot of the time, I don't think I would do that. I think maybe the one time I remember getting ahead of myself distinctly, because, like I said, when I would have done this one, I'm not even sure I would have realized what I was doing, would be in Pterodactyl Land itself, where you have the area that dips into Hailfire Peaks for just a moment, but you're behind a pane of glass where you can't move. And that, if anything, was just cool to me, because it was like, oh, it's just there. I can almost reach it, but no, I'm blocked. But something that did creep me out, I think, a little bit was in this area, you can kind of get to a place you're not supposed to go yet, and you'll encounter this game's equivalent of the hives full of bees from the first game, which is the possessed beehives.
Oh, yeah. I don't know, for me, whenever I would, like, step foot into these little pockets of the worlds to come, I would always feel like it would never, like, freak me out to any great degree, because by this point, you know, I was a teenager and not as bothered by this kind of stuff. Like, I wouldn't have nightmares about it like I was when I was a kid. But I would always have this phobia of, like, what if I accidentally, like, glitch through the geometry somehow? What would happen? Would I just be stuck in this much later world with no way to get out?
It does feel transgressive, like you're not supposed to be here yet, sort of thing.
Yes. But it's by design, but because of the way your brain is trained to play games, and especially if you are a completionist when you play games, and you follow this strict, like, linear path. Like, I remember how agonizing it was that there was one Jiggy in Banjo-Kazooie that you had to go back for. I think it was with the running shoes. You need the running shoes from Gobi's Valley to beat the races in Freezy Peak. That was agonizing to me, and Banjo-Tooie is just full of that by design.
Nowadays, I just do those worlds out of order.
I mean, and, you know, Ukulele, I'm replaying that right now for DK Vine done slow, and I'm just like, all right, I'll just leave a bunch of these quills. I won't even look for them. I'll be back. I know I have to be back. So Banjo-Tooie really helped make that okay, but it was still a learning experience. And so, yeah, the fear of being in this world that I felt like I wasn't supposed to be, even though that was what the developers wanted, that was what the team wanted, it was just like, this is wrong. And
yeah, it's directly counter to what the most effective way to play the first game was as well.
Yeah. So
like the first game is, aside from dipping in to get the turbo trainers in Gobi's Valley and then jumping out, it's advantageous generally in the name of your time spent to get everything done in a world as soon in your first trip there. Collect absolutely everything, because most of it will reset when you're gone. Banjo-Tooie, you have to constantly accept, I can't do this yet. There's a roadblock here that's insurmountable until such time that I get an ability that can overcome it.
Right. I think Mayhem Temple really does a great job, though, of starting the process of retraining your brain and your just muscle memory and reflexes. And this is the way Tooie's gonna work. Get used to it. Glitter Gulch Mine as a second world. I'll just say this up front. Glitter Gulch Mine is not my favorite world of Banjo-Tooie. In fact, it's pretty much in the running for my least favorite world of Banjo-Tooie. And, Grunty Industries, I don't even know if I dislike Grunty Industries. Just that I think Grunty Industries is a slog because the aesthetics are so dreary for me that I dislike it because it feels like a difficult world that is visually unappealing by design, by like that it's supposed to be. But Glitter Gulch Mine, it's just like, I don't hate it. I don't hate anything about this game, but maybe again, it's just my seasonal affective disorder kicking in. I'm underground. I'm away from the sunlight or natural light, and it's just there aren't many NPCs in Glitter Gulch Mine. It feels so far removed from Mayahem Temple, which felt like a bustling civilization, and Glitter Gulch Mine is a hole in the ground.
You took the words right out of my mouth, honestly. I think I do, to comfort you, I do think I share your opinion on that. I think Glitter Gulch Mine is kind of bottom rung for me, and it's not because the world is necessarily doing anything wrong. I think it's well designed, it's inoffensive in what it is, but it can't get over the fact that it's a hole in the ground with subsections that are even deeper, darker holes in the ground.
And it's just like peeling an onion. You're just finding more and more layers of darker holes. And eventually, it gets a little bit, I think overwhelming with like just. And it's not a bad world. It's not badly. No. It's not poorly designed. But it's like when people talk about their favorite worlds of Donkey Kong 64, like Crystal Caves for me never really comes to the forefront of my mind because it's a dark cavern.
Now,
I mean,
now that said, something I will give to the conceit of this world is it is functionally a Wild West world, and you will not find another game that presents its token Wild West world like this. Yeah, so, like, they really leaned into the grizzled old prospector stereotype quite well. Not just with one of the few NPCs in the world, but with the chief baddies you encounter in the world, which they're called Billy Bobs. Which... And they're distinguished by their hats, and similar to and saying yeehaw.
Yeah, similar to a building in Donkey Kong 64, they stay in the ground until you approach, and then it pops out, and they go yeehaw. And but eventually, like that it just that sound effect, it just gets lodged into your brain, and it feels like this world is nothing but Billy Bobs.
It feels like it's part of the soundtrack to me. Like when I picture the theme music of Glitter Gulch Mine in my head, I hear the first few banjo strings and then yeehaw.
Yeah.
Oh,
The environment itself, though, they do a nice job, like, blending, like, sparkling purples, and it like, as far as, like, a cave or a mine, it's at least as vibrant as it probably can be.
The color-coded piles of gemstones were a good way to make the cave aesthetic a little less drab, and it is why the central area is my favorite part of the mine, even though I sometimes get turned around in it.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And Glitter Gulch Mine connects to Mayahem Temple via the mole Dilberta, who you have to free in Mayhem Temple, and she comes back and she's friends or partners with Bullion Bill, who is a prospector, and I guess Dilberta is the mole miner that works with him. It's interesting to me how often this image of a mole in a hard hat comes up in the DKU. Obviously, Donkyong Land had Hard Hat, the mole, as a boss, and now we've got Dilberta here, and Returns would bring back the moles with hard hats.
You know, I have absolutely never thought about this before, but this is a Goofy Pluto paradox a little bit, isn't it? Because Dilberta is, albeit a sentient mole, we have bottles and jam jars in the same game.
Oh, shit. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I never really thought of Dilberta as, like, like, in relation to Bottles and Jam Jars and Bottles' family, and, like, but you're right. Is she a mole? Have I been misreading this?
Is she a mole or a rat?
She might be a rat, I guess.
I think she's meant to be a mole, though.
I mean, maybe. Like, I've always just assumed she's a mole.
Because digging.
Of the context.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you're absolutely right. What about Bottles? What about Jam Jars? In the context of Banjo-Kazooie, like, those are the moles. Whoa, you just blew my mind. How have I never put the pieces together? How have I never thought about it in these terms? That is weird that it's taken me 20 years. And maybe this has come up in, like, the sleepy part of my brain as I drifted off at night. I'm just like, Dilberta and Bottles, what? But then I fall asleep and then I forget about it in the morning. I don't know. Maybe that's happened. Whoa. Gibbon says, point of order, Ratstig and Burrow as well. So...
I do think she's meant to be a mole, though, because she doesn't have ears visible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess... I'm looking up an image of Dilberta right now because it's bothering me. And... God, I mean... Looks like a mole to me. But...
I mean, if she's a rat or a mouse, then we have Mr. Ripofsky to dissect.
Although, at least Mr. Ripofsky isn't in this game. But, you've got the Jippo Gyms, who are... there are different species of moles, though, right? So...
The walls are crumbling around us, and that's not good because we're in the cave world.
No, yeah. You know what? I'm just going to delete DK Vine. Dilberta broke me the same way Heggy broke me last episode. Oh my god. See, I think the problem is I never consider Dilberta or Bullion Bill, because the character in Glitter Gulch Mine that obviously always comes to mind, is Canary Mary. So, Canary Mary, Cameron, what more can be said about Canary Mary?
I mean, how many hours do we have?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there will probably be a character witness Canary Mary at some point in the future. But Canary Mary is different in the context of all of these characters that are anthropomorphic animals.
Talk about confusing anthropomorphism in your Banjo series.
Yeah, so, Dilberta might be confusing because she might be a different type of mole than the Bottles family. But Canary Mary is confusing because she's not necessarily just an anthropomorphic canary. She's human-ish.
Yeah, the part that makes it extra surreal is, in universe, she's treated like a normal canary.
Right, but
like no comment is made regarding Canary Mary's appearance.
Our eyes don't lie, and our eyes perceive her as a human woman with a really bad, like, Halloween bird costume. She reminds me of, like...
It's like a masquerade costume, almost, kind of.
Yeah.
Like, we say bird costume, but it's like a dress with wing accents and a beak. And
but
shoes.
She can fly. But she can fly. Yeah, and the joke, of course, about, canary in a coal mine, of course, like, that is why she's in this mine. So she has been used to test it for poison gas, but she's a human. And the fact that this is never commented on or referenced, even by Rare, I don't think it was ever, like, explained why she looks the way she does. And I could maybe reach out to, Steve Mails or maybe Ed Bryan. I don't know who was responsible for this monstrosity.
Own up to your crimes.
I mean...
I think it might have been Ed Bryan because he's alluded on Twitter to... Well, actually, didn't he post some concept art recently of Canary Mary?
I might have blacked that out. There hasn't been a character designed like Canary Mary that has been such a crime against the eyes, except Vendy, which was Kev Bayless. Here's the interesting thing, though, and this is another aspect of Rare's contributions to the DKU connecting to Nintendo's. So, in Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, there is a human male who dresses up as one of the birds in the game, and he's called Chopper Bird, but he's clearly a human in a bird costume. But it's never, like, brought up that you're human, you're not actually a bird. And in my headcanon, he belongs to the same organization as Canary Mary. Like, they are these avian enthusiast bird watchers who have traveled to the Rare Archipelago to live among the birds and disguise themselves as birds. And that they're just freaks of nature who, like, for some reason, Banjo and Kazooie and Donkey Kong are just oblivious to the fact that they're actually humans. Canary Mary is infamous too, not just for her, but the fact that she would come back in the final world, the final main world of the game, in a legendarily infamous challenge that she's not difficult in Glitter Gulch Mine. And you race her on the, not mine cart, but the hand cart, the
up and down hand cart, like basically from one end of the mine to the other, which is also a nice, like, integration of the environment into the challenge.
Yeah.
Because it is a track that goes around the entire level that you will encounter well before you reach this challenge.
And if you haven't, like, gotten, I think it's a green Jinjo's on the track, so if you haven't gotten that Jinjo, you'll go right past it, and you'll be like, there's a Jinjo, I need to go back to get that Jinjo. So it's a nice kind of way to get a glimpse of what you need to do throughout the world. But, she's not difficult here, and you have to race her. It's a Cheeto page and a Jiggy, right? Or Jiggy and a Cheeto page.
I think both races it's a Jiggy and a Cheeto page.
Yeah.
I had the observation recently, because I was in discussion about Canary Mary, as is wont to happen on DK Vine in circles. And that's... I think Canary Mary is evocative of, like, everything I like and dislike about Banjo-Tooie summed up in a single character, which is she's a gross weirdo with, like, a very, very dark backstory.
Mm-hmm.
That Banjo and Kazooie have a lot of, like, fun exchanges with, but I really don't like her challenge. I really do not like it. And I, like, for a bit of background, I am terrible at rapid button press challenges like this. Even the Glitter Gulch Mine one gave me trouble back in the day. And oddly cross teams, like as kind of rare teams I suppose were wont to do in the 90s, multiple barns hitting on the same ideas. This recurring gimmick of having to press a button or buttons rapidly in succession to beat a challenge came up in an odd amount of rare games around this time. It's in Banjo-Tooie, it's in Star Fox Adventures, it's maybe at its worst in Conker's Pocket Tales.
Oh yeah. And not only rare games, but Mario Party. The whole N64 trilogy.
Those mini games were a guaranteed loss if I ended up in one of them with my friends.
I think because they were in so many DKU games of this era, I did develop the strategy of what I don't even have a term for it. I'm just gonna make up one right now, like disassociated finger spasms. So I would basically let my whole arm go numb, my right arm, because I'm right-handed. I would let it go numb, and I would basically shake my hand, like tremble it to the point where I'm not even moving it. Like I'm trembling it at the wrist, and I would let my index finger rapidly hit the button in a way that it would hit it much faster than it would if I were to be actually actively pressing it with the full weight of the way I normally press buttons. And somehow doing it that way would be enough to usually overcome the challenge. But let me tell you, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep doing that as I age. Like, that might be just, like, the realm of young Hyle. I don't know if I'll be able... And I remember trying all sorts of different things before I hit upon that, like taking a spoon and letting the spoon hit the button as I pressed it with my finger. I don't even know what I was doing.
I definitely resorted to a pen a few times when I had to do these sort of challenges, which always runs the risk of screwing up your controller. But
yeah, I definitely... Well, I know, like, I wore out an N64 controller with Mario Party games, but I think that was the original Mario Party.
This is also one of the rare situations where having, like, an off-brand Mad Catz controller with a turbo feature comes in handy.
Oh, yeah, but I don't know. For me, it had to be authentically done on an official Nintendo controller, because I was one of those turds. So anyway, Canary Mary, though, we'll talk about her more in part 3 when we get to Cloud Cuckoo Land. Really quick, I want to talk about the transformation of this world, which is the detonator. Again, another really weird transformation that your Banjo becomes a plunger used to blow up dynamite. And at least it makes sense in the context of the world, and it's kind of funny, but I don't think anybody was really, like, champing at the bit to turn into a plunger.
The weird thing about the detonator transformation is it sees a lot of utility in this level, but of all the Banjo-Tooie transformations, I think it's the one I forget exists the most.
Yeah, I will admit, when I was compiling show notes for this episode, I had to look up what the transformation was in Glitter Gulch Mine, because I forgot. So, and I was like, oh right, it was the detonator, but very, very forgettable outside of the context of playing Glitter Gulch Mine. And this is where you bring Chuffy, the train, into play It's been derailed off the tracks in Glitter Gulch Mine, and Mumbo is able to raise it and levitate it, put it back on. But there is a boss man living inside, and that's Old King Coal, who is a pile of coal and fire.
I think this was one of those... Was Old King Coal one of those names that was come up with by a contest winner?
I believe so,
because it feels like such a rare name for this character that I think it's a really good name for him. But my thoughts on him, I like his kind of heel turn, or at least, like, I suppose it's just allegiance to whoever can beat him. In this fight, but I kind of like that his presence persists throughout the entire rest of the game, specifically because he's in charge of Chuffy.
It's a nice touch, yeah. It's not just that he's this boss and you defeat him and you get to take over his train. He's still very much the conductor of Chuffy, and he'll just become subservient to you once you beat him. And it's kind of cool then to see him like pop up in dialogue, and
I enjoy his affectations where he talks about Chuffy like a person.
Yeah. Well, and it's also weird to me that Chuffy is not anthropomorphic, because you would think at this point in like the Banjo series, you're just going to make everything anthropomorphic, and Chuffy would be this talking living train. And I think, in like your ukuleles, you would definitely see that. But here, Chuffy is...
Now I'm just thinking of like a train with Vendy's face on it, like Thomas style.
Don't give them ideas. For love of log, don't give them ideas. Yeah, I think that it's interesting that Chuffy is just a train, and not even like a train that's like... that has really any distinguishing characteristics or design. It is just an old train.
I remember being very impressed by the model for Chuffy back in the day.
Oh, it's such a great model.
Detailed train model.
It's a great, but it's just like a semi-realistic train. It's just weird to me how I sometimes think of Chuffy and I was like, wait, was Chuffy alive? No, Old King Cole was still in Chuffy, but Chuffy itself isn't a character, but it's called Chuffy. So all right, well, let's get out of this hole that we've dug for ourselves and get into, I think, what's my favorite world, or at least is right up there.
Probably my favorite as well. I think we're going to be on the same page on this.
It's Witchyworld. It's World 3, Witchyworld. And obviously, the kind of derelict, dangerous amusement park that is run by the enemy camp is not a new concept, even from this team at Rare. Donkey Kong Country 2 had Crazy Kremland, and Crazy Kremland is such a memorable and beloved world in a game full of memorable and beloved worlds, that the fact that they were able to do that idea again in the Banjo series, and have it be one of the most memorable and beloved worlds of Banjo-Tooie, I think says a lot to the durability of the idea, but also that they just had a lot more to say about the idea.
Oh, absolutely. Like, this cemented, like, this like, niche as one of my favorite bizarrely specific concepts for a video game, which is the bad guy theme park, or the something's amiss theme park. Like even a bit of like the new Battletoads, where the Dark Queen is kind of running an operation out of an abandoned theme park, kind of ticked that box for me a little bit. But thinking of just this world relative to Crazy Kremland, if I love Crazy Kremland, but if I had to pick between the two of them, I like Witchyworld more, and I think it's because of why I would like it more as a real-life theme park, which is, I think Crazy Kremland is a bit more evil bad guy Six Flags. Witchyworld is more evil bad guy Disney World. In that it has these themed lands that, like, it has thrill rides, but it has this very big focus on theming. Because it's a grunty park, it's not necessarily always the strongest theming, but that kind of makes me like it even more.
Yeah, you know, as a Virginia native, and, you know, you're one state over from me, so, like, I don't know, like, your go-to theme parks, although I've seen commercials for them because, you know,
I've been to King's Dominion, or whatever it's now called. Is it still King's Dominion?
It's still King's Dominion. It's not owned by Paramount anymore, but it's still King's Dominion. So yeah, here in Virginia, we've got King's Dominion and we've got Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, and they're both. At least King's Dominion used to have theming. I think that theming has kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit since the 90s, but they used to have, like, here is they had when it was owned by Paramount, they sort of themed it by their movies, so they had the Wayne's World area, and then they had the Congo. Remember the movie Congo? Well, they had the Congo area. And which, as a kid in the mid-90s, I, of course, like to pretend that was another Congo.
Yeah, I imagine that King's Dominion's theming has suffered simply because their IP is constantly being cycled out. Like, around the time I visited, they had the Nickelodeon area, which I think is now a Peanuts area.
They did have, I don't know what it is now, because it's been several years since I've been to King's Dominion, but they used to have it in the Nickelodeon area when that was all, like, Viacom, but Busch Gardens, on the other hand, in Williamsburg, it's based on Europe, so you've got Germany and Bavaria, you've got England, which is kind of like Victorian era England. You've got Italy, you've got Ireland, and then in the one in Florida they do Africa. So anyway, so for me, like, Witchyworld is very emblematic of what theme parks are, and that is they are themed after different things. They're recreating areas to, like, have this little tiny fantasy that you get to visit.
It even extends to the baddies. They're all the Jippo Gyms. They're all dressed up in theme costumes depending on where you encounter them.
I like that the Jippo Gym, like, a large part, like, weirdly half of Witchyworld almost is based around a space or extraterrestrial theme. And I like that the Jippo Gyms are dressed
I feel weird saying that name a little bit.
It seems like a name that's like...
like, I feel like the implication you're meant to take off of that is rip-off, and the etymology there is not great. But,
no, I know, and it's like the same thing.
It is at least spelled with a J.
Yeah, the same thing. The same thing with Mr. Ripovsky in Grunty's Revenge. Or, like, I think even Matt made a caption, like, say, like, "Is this okay?" How do we feel about this? It's not quite on the nose as, like, the Humba situation that we discussed last time, but
she's in the Wild West area of this park, isn't she?
Oh, that's right. Oh. Anyway, yeah, you said the Glitter Gulch Mine was a western area. Well, there was also a western area in Witchyworld
with a bouncy castle in the middle of it.
Just like every cowboy movie ever made.
This is part of what I love about Witchyworld, is that there is theming, but it's not strong theming, but in a way that feels purposeful.
But I like that the theming allows a couple different purposes, right? So the space theming is almost like foreshadowing the fact that you will meet extraterrestrials later in the game. Tooie takes some weird turns. But I like that, like, the Jippo Gyms are wearing alien masks that do not resemble the actual extraterrestrials we meet later on. It's like, because Gruntilda and doesn't know what actual space aliens look like. So she, like, this is just like the fantasy.
Those
and
masks
then
are hilarious.
One world later, you meet the reality. Witchyworld also has, well, okay, so let's talk about the space areas really quick. So we've got kind of like outer space where you've got the Star Spinner attraction, which is actually kind of my favorite area in Witchyworld. I love jumping across the planets. I love the kind of lunar terrain a little bit. It almost, if you squint really hard and you maybe huff some glue, I don't recommend doing that, children. But if you were to like be in the middle of a gas leak and you were to squint your eyes,
which you probably are in a theme park run by Grunty,
but you could almost pretend like you're playing Banjo-Kazooie Galaxy. Because you're jumping from these planetary bodies in this like interior, it's all an attraction. Like none of this is a reality, but it's still very, very cool. It's just like it's the same feeling I get whenever I'm in Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and I know I'm not in Bavaria, but I can delude myself into thinking I'm sort of there, and it's just like, I'm playing Banjo-Tooie. I know Banjo and Kazooie aren't in space, but I can kind of play along and feel like they are. It's different layers of imagination and pretend. And you've got the Dodgem Dome, which is an interesting way. It's I guess what we Americans call bumper cars.
Yeah, I think every area of Witchyworld has at least one thing that's like really strenuous or tenuously tied to the theming, and the Dodgem Dome is that for the space area. When otherwise the space area, like I'd say from an in-universe perspective, that's where the park's money is going. That's the attraction you want to visit if you're a kid and you go to Witchyworld. Is you go to the space area because that's where the Star Spinner is. That's where the Saucer of Pearl should be. And it's where the Dodgem Dome is.
Yeah, and the Dodgem Dome is a really weird but cool way to bring back the Twinklies and the Twinkly Munchers from Freezeezy Peak. And the Twinkly Munchers are driving Dodgems.
Are they?
They're
Twinkly
driving
Munchers?
The bumper cars. Yeah.
I never made that connection.
They're supposed to be Twinkly Munchers, yeah. And so it's just like, but it's a completely different context from the wintry Christmas holiday winter solstice theming of Freezeezy Peak. Here they are in this outer space bumper car attraction. And I just like the repurposing, and you get that quite a bit in Witchyworld, even from Freezeezy Peak callbacks. But also, I should point out too, and we're gonna be talking more about Mr. Pants when we get to Hellfire Peaks. But
yes.
There is a Mr. Pants Easter egg in the Dodgem Dome in the lobby. If you look up at the starfield pattern on the wall, you will eventually see a Mr. Pants constellation. So, check that out. But, you've also got the other space area in Witchyworld, which is Area 51, which is really just a docking space for the Saucer of Peril. And the Saucer of Peril, is in a crate back in Glitter Gulch Mine. You free it. Flies into Witchyworld, and then you get to fly around Witchyworld on the Saucer of Peril. It's a target.
The Area
game.
51 part of the park is very transitional. It mainly serves, I think, two functions outside of the hidden collectible in it that you have to open with the van later, which is it's where the Saucer of Pearl. A Saucer of Peril docks at the end of its run, and Also, where you bust down the gate to Area 51 and Naruto run the food to Pterodactyl Land to smuggle it out.
That's right, yeah. I always just found it weird that they had this whole separate area that was, like, thematically linked to the space area, but wasn't part of the space area.
It is, like, to the point where the enemies still wear the alien costumes around it, which, of course, they would. It's Area 51. But, yeah, it's just completely disconnected from it.
It's also very much... this game is of 2000, that there, like, was an Area 51 reference. You know, so much of 90s conspiracy culture and ufology... that's the UFO-ology, kiddos. But
and this was the X-Files era, or heyday.
Yeah, this was like near the end. I think like 9/11 was really like the end of that. It's like in the cultural zeitgeist. But I mean, I'm nostalgic for it because that's when conspiracy theories were kind of just harmless fun. It was just like, yeah, the government's hiding aliens in Area 51, and there's recovered spacecraft, and you know, considering all the stuff that's been leaking lately about, you know, UFOs and stuff, like, it's still more plausible than any of the conspiracy theories since. But I miss when it was all the rage, because it was fun. It was fun, and I like that one of my favorite games actually actively references it. It makes it of its time, but it was a happy time, at least as far as that stuff goes. But the Saucer of Peril, I love the Saucer of Peril. I like the ride itself, like the target shooting game, but I just like it as a character, and I like that it keeps coming back in Banjo games. I like that it was essentially the winged spiny shell in Banjo Pilot. I like that it reappeared in Nuts and Bolts, and I don't know. I like the design of it.
I like that it's a character, and the character is very kind to you.
Yeah. I like that there's this little friendly robot flying saucer theme park attraction that is a character. Like, Chuffy the train is not a character, but the Saucer of Peril is a character. So there's also the haunted zone, I guess is what it's called, and this is where you get to have some spooky stuff, because there's no like Mad Monster Mansion equivalent in this game, even though you're on like witch territory. There's no spooky haunted
it's
area.
Like horror themed, but different facets of horror like within it, because you have like probably the tenuous theming coming up again, the Dive of Death, which is like the giant perilous diving board off of a extremely perilous height into a tiny little bucket of water.
Right, which no actual theme park would ever offer. Like that it's like they're taking.
I mean,
something
that's a Looney Tunes gag, is what it is.
Yeah, it's taking something you would see at maybe like a really sketchy circus and applying it to a theme park. But it would make sense for a dubious theme park in a libertarian paradise that is the Isle of Hags.
Also, primo spot if you deliberately want to miss the bucket and just watch Banjo have a really funny falling animation.
If you want to see this beloved video game icon have a hilarious death, definitely miss that bucket. You've got the I guess the Inferno, which is like Dante's vision of hell. And
it's hell right down to Mumbo's skull having devil horns on it.
Yeah, I like that they figured out a way to reference hell without actually calling it hell. The Inferno was a good, clever workaround. But there's a Helter Skelter, which I didn't. Okay, so as an American, I didn't know what a Helter Skelter was, but God,
I didn't. That's a pun, isn't it? That never occurred to me.
Oh, yeah.
Helter Skelter.
But this is also where I learned what a Helter Skelter was, and as I got into the Beatles around this same time period, that's how I learned what the song Helter Skelter was singing about. So, or what Paul McCartney was singing about in the song Helter Skelter. So, thank you Banjo-Tooie for helping me appreciate the Beatles' White Album all the more. So the Cave of Horrors.
I love the setup and payoff to this. This feels like an interactive gag when you encounter this.
What's interesting to me is to access the Cave of Horrors, you go through this haunted cavern that's actually filled with ghosts. And then you get into the Cave of Horrors.
Now,
and there are no horrors whatsoever.
So the reason I say this the way I did, in your playthrough, when you got to the Cave of Horrors, did you read the sign before going in?
Yes, but I forget what's on the sign.
I forget the specifics, but it's like management's not responsible for like soiled trousers upon viewing the attractions in the Cave of Horrors. Like basically setting up that no, this is going to be a legitimately scary thing, just like the weirdly organic like bridge you had to cross to get here with sharp teeth. Yeah. And then of course you actually look at what the horrors on display are. And it's pathetic. and not only pathetic, but they are actually it's the Esquilax bit from The Simpsons is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, but they are imprisoning characters against their own free will and using them as circus freaks. But they're not even freaks. They're just like residents of the Isle of Hags. And this surprisingly, this is where Gobi comes back, because, you know, Gobi said he was going to run off to the lava world from Click Clock Wood, and then that's the last you saw of him, and you were like, oh my god, he's gonna be in this either hidden lava world or a world in Banjo-Tooie, or for a while there I thought maybe he was gonna be in Jet Force Gemini.
Excuse me, Hyle, the sign above him clearly says Ancient Bearded Camel.
Ancient Bearded Camel, which isn't even a horror. Like, what?
The attractions are Ancient Bearded Camel, Mighty Evil Dinosaur, and Weird Killer Alien.
Right, and so Gobi is the Ancient Bearded Camel, and they just they hot glued a beard to him, I think.
Yeah, it's not even like he grew the beard. He says like I think the Jims kidnapped him and glued the beard to his face. But he keeps that beard for the entire rest of the game.
They kidnapped him, like, en route when he was like, going from Click Clock Wood to Hailfire Peaks. He got apprehended by the Jippo Jims, and they glued a beard to him and put him in a cage. And so he hasn't even gotten to the lava world at this point. The place we just were imagining Gobi was for 2 years. Never even got there yet. You have to free him here. The evil mighty dinosaur, which is just a weird combination of words, is a character named Scrut. And Scrut is just setting up Pterodactyl Land.
I didn't know... Again, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together in Mayhem Temple, so I don't even think I knew Pterodactyl Land was going to be a thing at this point. So it was weird to run into a dinosaur here and see that paid off later.
Like, there's so much setup in Banjo-Tooie, and if, you know, you're paying attention, just... like, that's really why it does feel like one large plausible world, even if it's... like, just all these disparate ideas, like Dinosaur World and Underpants Factory. It still works because you've got a dinosaur in the amusement park, and it just, like, there's just this interconnectivity.
And you take for granted that, oh, well, it's a dinosaur because it's a video game, who this doesn't have any meaning, but of course it does.
It does, yes. And then the alien is a Jinjo. Obviously. Well, not obviously, but...
Not from this world on, it's not obvious. It's a Jinjo. Because I guess we should go into that. This is the first world where you encounter Minjos.
Yeah, so besides the gyms, there are the minge.
There's a lot of minge in this game.
There's a lot, yeah, they really were fond of that that reference, as we mentioned. Yeah, Minjos are the evil versions of Jinjos, because why not? Because now, just like, you know, Banjo-Kazooie, you have the honey hives, the bee houses, whatever, that would eventually be swarming with bees. Well, now, starting with this world, every time you approach a Jinjo, you don't know necessarily if that's a Jinjo or if that's a Minjo. And if that's a Minjo, it's gonna chase you, it's gonna try to shock you. Minjos are kind of like gremlins. They're what happens when you feed a gremlin after midnight or get them wet.
The general rule, though it isn't always true in 100% of cases, is if the Jinjo looks like finding it was way too easy, it is probably a Minjo.
Right, and you'll eventually get into the habit of firing grenade eggs at it just to see if it gets knocked out. Because a Jinjo can take it, a Minjo cannot.
And their colors will randomize if you leave the room and come back.
Yeah, so there are a couple of tells, but if you're tired, if you're distracted, if you're just not thinking about it,
or you just don't want them to kill you when you walk up.
Yeah, so yeah, it's never really established lore-wise, at least in this game, what the deal with the Minjos are. Is it like a Vulcan Romulan thing where they're like an offshoot and there's bad blood between the
I definitely imagined
tribes?
Like an equivalent Minjo monarchy that's entirely off screen.
See, that would be something that would be really cool to visit and examine and explore in another Banjo game. Like, what territory hasn't been touched? The Minjos. And I think we're in sort of a Jinjo renaissance because of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And then, of course, we've got the new Fangamer plushes, I think almost as a direct result of Ultimate. Just, the Jinjonators in Ultimate as Banjo-Kazooie's Final Smash, and so I think there's more interest in Jinjo lore. So I think if you were to examine what could we do with a Banjo 3E or whatever, Minjos. That's for you, Rare and whoever. Take that idea. I won't sue. Just give me a credit in the game credits. Special thanks. So I can boost my credits on Moby Games. So yeah, but it's also interesting too, just talking really quick about Jinjo lore. We know from Grunty's Revenge that the Jinjos lived in what is now Grunty's lair in Spiral Mountain. But there might be some allusions that the Jinjos actually have an extraterrestrial origin from way back. Of course, the Cave of Horrors says it as a joke, but a little bit later on, a couple worlds down the line, there might be a clue that the Jinjos are extraterrestrial.
It also just seems like another layer of joke of, similar to Mumbo, kind of the game itself copying, look, we don't have any idea what these creatures are.
Right. Let's talk a little... Oh, I guess we should talk about Madame Grunty, because this is a weird effect of this world that, isn't... I forget about until I remember, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a thing.
This is kind of like a precursor to the, individual who is definitely not capital B running capital Casino.
Yeah, in that... This is clearly Gruntilda, giving as a fortune teller in this tent, but the whole conceit behind this is that you go in, she might give you something useful, or she might just hit you and you lose a
Mostly
a
hit
honeycomb.
you.
Yeah, but then there's this like there's actually a reason to continue to go in there. Do you want to explain this a little bit, Cameron? Because a lot of people don't know about this.
Yeah, so every time you visit Madame Grunty, you have a chance, like a very, very small chance of something happening, which is alluded to elsewhere in the game. There are these signposts inside of Jiggy Wiggy's temple that say when fortune smiles upon you, here will be the Jiggy secrets, which will basically just give you hints as to where every Jiggy is in the entire game. But the hint is really vague. There's another signpost that you can find hidden not so far away that tells you Witchyworld is where fortune may smile upon you. And what that is every single time you visit Madame Grunty, you have a very, very slight chance of unlocking the Jiggy secret.
Very slight chance.
Now, I wanted to take this time. Have you ever gotten that secret, Hyle? Because I, in all these years of playing Banjo-Tooie, have never gotten it.
It took an entire day. I remember, I have vivid memories of going into the tent, getting continually, like, hammered by Grunty, and going back in. And I remember, too, because, my cat of 16 years, who I got right around the time of Banjo-Tooie, she was, I remember she was still, like, sniffing around the den, trying to get, like, used to her new home. And I just remember, like, slowly bonding with her while sitting on the floor, continually going in Madame Grunty's tent. It's
made even more annoying by, like, in order to, like, you can keep going in there to get the Get Jiggy cheat, but it also keeps... Grunty will continually close the tent if you visited too many times for refurbishing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it takes a while. I did it. I, like, committed, like... And this is the great thing about when you're, you know, a kid or a teenager is, you know, on a weekend, like, this is all you might really have to do aside from, you know, some minor chores, but you don't have to worry about life. And you know, I this was like a year into DK Vine, but it's not like that really was the minor media enterprise that it is today. It was more of a hobby of some high schoolers. So I didn't have to worry about, oh, I've got to do these 17 things for DK Vine today. No, I was going to go into Grunty's tent and I was going to get this damn fortune to smile upon me. So I did it, finally. I was so happy. The equivalent today might be seeing the Shrouded Ghost in Sea of Thieves.
And your cat wondered if this was just going to be life with you forever.
And it was. So I will just completely cede the floor to you to talk about the van transformation, because when I think of the van transformation, I think of Cameron Reigle, because I first knew you as Clutch on the DK Vine forum using the neon avatar of the van transformation.
Which I created. That was one of the first things I did for DK Vine, was make that avatar. So, yeah, the van transformation, needless to say, my favorite one in the game. Even though it doesn't have that much utility, it's effectively a key to go around. Some of the attractions in Witchyworld are paid. And,
paid! Got it.
Paid. So you can't get into them initially, but there's a sort of a cash box sitting out front. And the conceit of the van transformation, which Humba tells you, is that it's not just a van, but it is an armored van full of money. Endless money. That you can just back straight up to any paid attraction and slip them the money and open that attraction permanently for any future visit. So it's also a transformation you really only need once if you can get everything in one go. Also, there are special, like, van-only doors. The van has you have a horn ability with the van. You can honk the horn to open specific doors for the van, or just because it's fun to honk a horn. And that, I think, is really why the van is my favorite transformation. One, it's a vehicle, and I'm a sucker for any kind of, like, terrestrial, like, car introduced to a video game world. I probably wished on a monkey's paw, and that's why Nuts and Bolts happened. But I did love Nuts and Bolts. Like, this is probably why I acclimated to it more than most. Also, it is a transformation that is indestructible. I think there aren't even that many pits to fall in. I don't know if you can jump into the one in the Cave of Horrors, but like lava in the Inferno can't kill it, enemies can't kill it, and it can just run down any enemy in the level instantly. I don't even think it has a health bar. It's just taken as a fact that this thing is indestructible, and it's very fun to maneuver around too. It's got like a very cartoony, like putt-putt kind of noise to it. It can jump just like Banjo. It moves fast. It moves quick for a van and is maneuverable, so it's not like a clunky transformation either. It's just a lot of fun. I really like the van.
Yeah, it's a transformation that, honestly, if I sit and think about it, it's probably one of the more enjoyable ones in Tooie. But I always think about, like, the T-Rex transformation just because that was set up by Kazooie, or I think about the Bee transformation because that was in Kazooie. And so it's like some of these, like, earlier transformations in the game I just, like, gloss over, but I think the van was a lot of fun, and I like it more than the snowplow and ukulele, even though I like the snowplow a lot more than when the game launched. The
van was why I looked forward to the snowplow and was met with regret.
Well, the snowplow is a lot more fun to play now. Yeah, the patch definitely made the snowplow a much more enjoyable transformation than ukulele. So I don't think we need to talk about Mr. Patch all that much, because earlier this season, Just Andre made us do a character witness episode about Mr. Patch. But let's talk about Konga. Let's talk about how they brought back the character of Konga in the big top, the big tent in the middle of Witchyworld.
Not as a boss, but
not as a boss.
Like
as the
kind of like a ringmaster.
Ringmaster, yeah. He's the ringmaster of Witchyworld. He's got the little Witchyworld emblem on him, which is like a pumpkin, and he's got the top hat and everything. He's got I think a whip.
I really love this continuity for Konga, because there's no practical reason this had to be Konga in this role. It could have been a completely new character. Yeah, this is where Tooie and Tooie does this, where they will just bring back a character from Banjo-Kazooie. Like, there are a lot of new characters in Banjo-Tooie, but they also were like, well, what if, let's say, Konga the gorilla, what if he, like, is more directly employed by Gruntilda and goes to work at her amusement They don't
park?
even really explore the through line with him. It's just taken as written, oh, this is what Konga's job is now. There's no, oh, hey, we remember you from Mumbo's Mountain. What's up?
Yeah, because in Mumbo's Mountain, he was just the resident bully gorilla who Chimpy wanted to get an orange from the tree he was guarding. And now he's got a job, and it's at Witchyworld, and he's the ringmaster. But it's great because I liked Konga. I wanted more of Konga in Banjo-Kazooie, and I like that we got him here. Although, Konga isn't the only character that came back in Witchyworld, and I'm not talking about Gobi here. There was Groggy, there was Soggy, and there was Moggy. And they were, so they've aged. The 2 years that have passed from Kazooie to Tooie are reflected in their characters. They are now no longer identical.
They have aged into distinct character designs.
Yes, and not only that, but they're monsters. They're little tiny terrors. They're definitely
they're Boggy's kids.
They're brats. Yes, they're their father's kids. But we also meet Boggy's wife and their mother, who we only know as Mrs. Boggy because the patriarchy is alive on the Isle of Hags. But Mrs. Boggy is she needs to find her kids. Where are her kids?
This is this is really kind of a neat, like, the opposite conceit of Konga, where you're not running into somebody from the first game, but you're running into somebody related to a character from the first game without running into Boggy first.
Yeah, so Boggy is purposely, like, left out of Witchyworld, but here's his wife. Hey, you remember Boggy, the deadbeat dad? Turns out his wife hasn't left him, somehow, and she brought the kids to Witchyworld for the day, but they all are off, and they're refusing to go home, and they all have their different wants and requirements to get lured back home. And this is where, you mentioned the food earlier, but this would be a good time before we leave Witchyworld behind to bring up Big Al and Salty Joe, two other employees of Witchyworld aside from Konga.
The flavor of these guys is another factor in why I love Witchyworld so much.
Yeah, so they are sort of like, do you remember the Canadian kids show from the 80s that aired on Nickelodeon called You Can't Do That on Television?
I know of it, but I believe it was off the air by the time I actually got Nickelodeon as a channel. We didn't have satellite until about 1996.
So there was a disgusting hamburger chef on that show who was like always like coughing and like it's snot, and he was just making like horrible burgers that would make the kids sick. And that's what Big Al is. Big Al is a rhinoceros, speaking of a goofy Pluto situation. You know, usually in the DKU we think of rhinos as Rambi. But Big Al is an anthropomorphic. Like, Rambi's usually portrayed as a dog, right? A big dog.
Yeah, even has a little, like, panting animation.
Yeah. But Big Al is anthropomorphic. He is a hamburger chef in a little hamburger stand. And he is disgusting.
Big Al is a hallmark of Banjo-Tooie's texture depth because he is disgusting. His apron is just covered in, like, 3 distinct kinds of stain. He's got, like, visible snot dripping out his nose. It's such a, like, wonderfully gross character.
Salty Joe, he runs the fry stand. And he's not as memorable to me as Big Al is.
Salty Joe is less of a... He's notable... He's not as directly disgusting as Big Al is. His defining characteristic is more that he hates his job.
Yes, yeah. So, but yeah, they just provide more... Well, I was going to say flavor, but maybe that's the poor choice of words. But they provide more texture to Witchyworld. Again, makes it feel like a real theme park. Because, you know, Kremland, and obviously, like, there's a difference between a 2D platform on the Super Nintendo versus a 3D platform on the N64. But, you know, we never really see the way Kremland works. We never see really any employees of Kremland. But... With Witchyworld, we like know who's working there, we know who's operating the different facets of it, and it feels more real. And like with Big Al and Salty Joe, you don't even get the impression that they're like on board with the Winky Bunyan evil agenda. They're just...
Salty Joe just wants
employees.
to get paid.
Just get paid, right.
And
anyway,
he seems to be better at his job than Big Al as well, because I've noticed, like, they both wear these sort of, like badges on their uniforms with stars on them, and Salty Joe has 4, Big Al has 1.
Yeah, granted, it's probably harder to screw up salty, greasy potato slivers than it is hamburgers. And oh my god, what about Bovina? How does Bovina exist in this world where there are hamburgers? Because these are probably... This is the year 2000. These probably aren't Beyond Burgers or Impossible Burgers.
I mean, it's Grunty. These could be mole burgers.
And not the burrowing rodent, just like the little skin tag she shaves off herself. Oh, she's a skeleton at this point, so that doesn't make any sense. So anyway, yeah, that's Witchyworld. It's my favorite world. I'll just say it's my favorite world. I love Witchyworld.
I think so too. I think there's usually like one big part of a level I really, really like. Witchyworld is like I think I enjoy pretty much every facet of this level.
And I love it, even though I never figured out how to get into the Flume of Doom. So that's how much I love it. No disappointment there. All right, let's talk about Jolly Roger's Lagoon, and then we'll take some calls, and we'll put a to be continued on this episode. So Jolly Roger's Lagoon is the 4th world, and I always confuse it with the Super Mario 64 world of a similar name, to the point where I have to stop and think, wait a second, did I call it by the right name? Is it Jolly Roger's Lagoon, or is that the Super Mario 64 world?
Jolly Roger Bay. Right?
Yeah, no, but it's Jolly Roger's Lagoon in Banjo-Tooie, yes. So, Jolly Roger's Lagoon is their excuse to get the pirate stuff out of their system here. Because, you can't have a Greg Mayles game. Hell, you can't have a Steve Mayles game without them getting to indulge their love and affinity for all things piracy. And Jolly Roger's Lagoon, I think, is an important stop on that path that eventually led us to Sea of Thieves. Not only is Jolly Roger's Lagoon the introduction to what would become a very important character in the franchise, but it also allows a proper introduction to a character who preceded the Banjo-Kazooie franchise and got booted when it became Banjo-Kazooie.
You talk about getting pirates out of their system. This is the Pirate.
So, Jolly Roger's Lagoon is this, like, quaint little coastal town, like, sort of like a coastal English town. But, the centerpiece of it is Jolly Roger's Inn or Jolly Roger's Tavern, depending on what you call it. But, it's run by is also, in fact, the mayor of Jolly Roger's Lagoon, Jolly Roger. And
I love this entire town area of Jolly Roger Lagoon. It's just like a rest stop of the entire game.
Yeah, Jolly Roger's Lagoon is, as a whole world, it's probably not my favorite, but the town is one of my favorite locations in the entire game.
That's pretty much where it is for me. Like, I can't count the world as one of my favorites just because the tavern is an insurmountable high mark. There's nowhere you can go but down. I mean, the town area itself.
Yeah. And what I like about this is that it means so much from the lore of the Donkey Kong universe. This is like a very important setting, even though we didn't realize it at the time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sea of Thieves right here, okay? So, sorry everyone, you'll have to indulge me here, but in Sea of Thieves, we learn that the Jolly Roger's Tavern was actually established in the Sea of Thieves. In dialogue, it's mentioned, and it's like they're planning to build it, and it's not actually in the game as of yet. But the implication is that it got its start in a Sea of Thieves, and it eventually was relocated on the Isle of Hags, perhaps as like a stopover for sailors who were setting out on the voyage to the Sea of Thieves, or to find the Sea of Thieves. And anyway, and Jolly Roger himself, Jolly Roger is not the namesake of the tavern or the town. Jolly Roger, from what I gather, is kind of like a title. Like, whoever is running the inn takes on the moniker of Jolly Roger. In fact, Jolly Roger sort of changes his name in Nuts and Bolts. So
it also helps explain why they're like the Jolly Roger Tavern and Jolly Roger himself have nothing to do with the skull and crossbones that is an actual Jolly Roger.
Yeah. So, well, okay, so I guess we're gonna talk about Jolly here. So, I think Jolly Roger is, at least the Jolly, I think, well, it's Roger too.
It's a joke of sorts.
It is a joke of sorts. So, this is somewhat of a Humba situation, although I would say it has more benefits than a Humba situation. So, Jolly Roger is in some ways a groundbreaking character. Jolly Roger is the first openly gay character in a Rare game, and I say openly gay, like, it's first character that was outright acknowledged to be gay by Rare, and like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, it was all cutesy innuendos and puns in this game, and it was played for camp, but then, like, they were just upfront about it on the website, like, yeah, Jolly Roger is gay. And it's not treated as a big deal. I mean, it's played for, a lot of stuff is played for laughs here, and maybe that's unfortunate, but, as someone who does appreciate a semen joke, regardless of context, I do like the menu.
And importantly, Kazooie is mean to everyone, never mean to Jolly over, his sexuality. Ever.
Yeah, and
it is never the butt of the joke between the characters themselves.
Exactly, and that's kind of cool, and it makes me kind of respect Kazooie, that Kazooie can be heinous for a lot of reasons, but she's never a bigot. So, and the Jolly Roger does become friends with Banjo and Kazooie, and really, that is one of the most important contributions that Banjo Pilots would make to the series, is that it sort of promoted Jolly Roger to the point where then Nuts and Bolts did something with him, going off of Banjo Pilot, making him of outsized importance. But, you know, this was the year 2000, and we've come a long way in the last 20 years, but I still think it's really pretty fucking cool that there was an openly gay character, not just in a Rare game, because, you know, like that's like of no consequence in Rare games anymore. Like, Sea of Thieves is, you know, it's just, there is all sorts of representation in Sea of Thieves, and you don't even blink your eye at it, but 20 years ago, this was a huge deal, especially in a Nintendo game where it's unfortunately still all too rare of a sight in a Nintendo game.
In so much as, like, a character whose entire point of existence is a vector to give you jiggies, like, Jolly Roger is the, like, biggest breakout of the Banjo series. Like, within itself.
Yeah, like, you think of, like, all the other characters that we remember, like, you know, Captain Blubber, maybe, and other characters, like Boggy, for sure, who have, like, continually come back in appearance after appearance. But I think Jolly Roger is one of the few where you can say he was outright promoted from bit player in Banjo-Tooie to main cast by the time we got to Nuts and Bolts.
He's a character that I've noticed, like, a following of people really like, and it's not, like, like people like Boggy as a character, but it's like, oh, I love Boggy, he's a piece of shit. Jolly, Jolly is this character people love for who he is. Just this very jovial, open guy who's very friendly.
He's a very happy frog who will coyote ugly on the table of the bar.
And he's got very good moves. I love his dancing.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jolly Roger is also the quote-unquote author of our Instagram page, run by Joe Mudd. So, yeah, we love Jolly here at DK Vine. And the fact that he, like, runs the tavern, and the tavern is such a hub of... Well, it's not even, like, really that much of a hub, but the fact that Black Eye is in the tavern says a lot to, like, how we view it from the perspective of the Banjo series and the DKU, and just importance. Jolly's partner, by the way, who is not as important as Jolly would become, is Mary Maggie Malpass, named after Steve Malpass.
That itself is a mystery that I don't think will ever be solved, because I think we've asked, why is Mary Maggie named after Steve Malpass? And there's, as far as I know, no straight answer to that.
No, but Mary Maggie is, she's been swallowed by a fish, like Jonah and the whale, so Jolly is despondent, and you basically have to free Maggie during the course of your adventures deep under the waters of Jolly Roger's Lagoon, en route to the lost civilization that lies therein. But yeah, Mary Maggie is I'm okay with them dropping her. She is obviously she is well, I don't even know. Like,
the broadness of the stereotype is a little bit more problematic with Maggie, I think, because you can read into what they're doing with the character in multiple ways, and there are varying degrees of unflattering depending on what the intent was.
Yeah, where Jolly, I think, aside from, like, the innuendos that you get, and the cheap laughs you might get, and the I can't believe they're getting away with this in Banjo-Tooie kind of aspect of Jolly is basically a great character, right? And he became an even better character. Where Maggie is like, maybe we'll just leave that in the past. Like, in the year 2000, I can see it. This was no different than the stuff you would see on, like, the sitcoms of the era. But, yeah, maybe just have them, go their separate ways off screen, and it's fine. Captain Black Eye, though. Captain Black Eye is the Norm Peterson of Jolly. In that he is the resident barfly who was sitting at the back of the bar. And
I gotta say, he is such a weird character to encounter in the context of this game if you are not in on the joke.
Well,
because
we are primed for it.
This is this very human, heavily texture detailed character, like a fairly distinctly human pirate sitting in this game full of colorful animals and witches and one magic human.
We were primed for it, though, because his portrait was in Mad Monster Mansion. So, at the very least, we knew of this pirate. And in the build-up to Banjo-Tooie, Lee Loveday on the Rare website revealed that his name was Captain Black Eye. So we were, like, we knew who he was. We didn't know the lore and legend and reason.
You say him. That like a picture of his face in Grunty's manner, and knowing his name makes it any less confusing.
Well, okay, so we didn't know the history of Dream at the time, and that it was originally starring a boy named Edson. And we didn't know that he was, in one build of the game, going to fight a band of pirates led by Captain Black Eye. We didn't know any of that. So, Captain Black Eye's presence in Jolly's Tavern and the allusion to him in Banjo-Kazooie made us think he had some outsized role to play when it came to what we know now as Stop and Swap, right? So the thing was, oh, you gotta visit Black Eye, and he'll sail you back to the Rusty Bucket Bay and all this, or he'll sail you to Treasure Trove Cove. And they did play with this a bit, because in the room Black Eye's sitting, you've got a picture of Shark Food Island, and like, if they didn't know what they were doing, then I would be shocked. Because it seems to me like they were playing up the connection. And maybe there was some sort of connection. Maybe Black Eye would be the one who would give you the codes to go back to the Sandcastle in Banjo-Kazooie, so you could hot swap the cartridges. I don't know. I'll talk about it with Steve. But, yeah, Captain Black Eye has all of these weird lines that don't really make sense out of the context, unless you know the history that...
yeah, what is he talking about? A bear stole his glory, like in the context of Banjo-Tooie. It's a very insular joke.
But Sea of Thieves does open up a pathway to make that line work in the context of in-universe. So we know Captain Black Eye is around in Sea of Thieves time. Greg Mayles is actually sailing as that character, or he's embodying Captain Black Eye as his pirate
named
character.
character in the game, and also makes a physical appearance in the Tales from the Sea of Thieves book.
Yeah, so and he runs one of the clothing shops, and so we know Captain Black Eye is alive in the golden age of piracy at the time of Sea of Thieves. In Sea of Thieves, they mention a Fountain of Youth in one of the Tall Tales. So we're connecting dots, and we're like, well, Captain Black Eye must have found that Fountain of Youth and lived across the centuries to the time of Banjo-Tooie. When he mentions the bear stole its glory, well, they've got the bear and bird figurehead in the game based on a prophetic legend from the ancients of the Sea of Thieves who foresaw the events of Banjo-Kazooie. So, basically, at some point, Black Eye in Sea of Thieves gets ripped off in a major way by a pirate using the bear and bird figurehead. And so when he says a bear stole his glory, and it looks like you, it all ties together. and that's why Captain Black Eye is a shell of himself. He's become this lout, this layabout, just hanging around Jolly's Tavern on the Isle of Hags. Best days behind him. Although he does make some visits to Ghoulhaven Hall, too. And Pinata Island, and anyway. But Captain Black Eye, I will have more to say about him on the Stop and Swap episode. But outside in the town, we've also got the return of Captain Blubber, who we last saw at the end of Banjo-Kazooie. He had sold his treasure. He had taken his treasure, his golden treasure, to spend, and he bought a wave racer, right? And now he's running a shop selling these, and he is near bankrupt. Things are not going so hot for old Captain Blubber. Times be tough. And so, basically, this all sets up Captain Blubber, so there's a monetary ecosystem in the town of Jolly Roger's Lagoon where you use the balloons. And this is the only time in Banjo-Tooie that you use the balloons. But basically, you use the balloons all about the town with Captain Blubber and Pano and Black Eye, and so anyway, you're basically setting up Blubber to run out again and go off on a new venture that again comes back at the end of the game.
Yeah, you just kind of an endless rags to riches cycle for Captain Blubber in each game.
Rags to riches to rags, yeah. Being a pirate captain didn't work out for him, so he becomes a merchant selling a more modern form of sea transportation, and that doesn't work out for him, so he goes really just crazy. But Hano is a peg-legged. What is he? Is he a weasel? Is he a fox? He's not a weasel. He's like some sort of woodland rodent, right?
I'm not 100% sure with him. He's too. I want to say like a skunk, but he's like more grayish than anything.
Yeah, let me look up a picture of him because I don't I know like I figured out in the past what he is supposed to be, but I don't know.
I mean, he's got like kind of the same like vague rodent face that Salty Joe has.
Yeah. I guess we don't I don't really know what he is, but he's got a peg leg and he uses a crutch.
He's constantly almost falling over as well.
Yeah, but yeah, he runs the pawn shop, and
yeah, the Banjo Wiki says he's a rat, but I don't know if I believe that looking at his tail.
No, the Banjo Wiki also says there's the portrait of Captain K. Rool in his shop, and there is not. Right? They just hallucinated.
That's not there. Portrait of...
That's not there. Right?
Though his shop is kind of Easter egg central for this world.
It is, but there's no Captain K. Rool reference in Banjo-Tooie. There is a Brentilda portrait in there, and I think the Grunty doll is in there.
Yep, the Grunty doll with a missing eye from Banjo-Kazooie again, the reoccurring missing eye joke, which I guess Banjo-Kazooie set up.
Interesting. Everything was planned years in advance. It's all one grand master plan that we're still seeing play out to this day. But yeah, so the town is my favorite part of Jolly Roger's Lagoon. And then just outside the town, though, there is a delightful reappearance by another beloved DK Vine favorite, Tip-Top, from off of Diddy Kong Racing. Comes back. Of course, he was in Bubble Gloop Swamp in Banjo-Kazooie, but Banjo-Tooie really establishes him as a banjo supporting character, a minor banjo supporting character. To the point where, like, now Tip-Top, I think, is more linked with Banjo-Kazooie than Diddy Kong Racing. But Tip-Top, it turns out, has been a little bit busy since we last saw him. And he's got 19 kids and counting.
Yeah. 19 girls and one pending.
Yes. So they play a little bit with what kind of turtle Tip-Top is. Tip-Top is not a sea turtle, but they're kind of fudging it here that Tip-Top would take his egg to the coast to hatch it like a sea turtle. I'm fine with it because whatever. But when I first played Banjo-Tooie, I was like, what do you mean Tip-Top has 19 kids? But of course, a turtle would lay multiple eggs, so it makes more sense. But it's just like, whoa, like when we first met Tip-Top, I thought he was a kid, or at the very least a teenager, and then he was conducting an orchestra.
In the back of my mind, I was thinking, like, after playing the original game and going back to this, like, were some of his kids in the Tip-Top choir?
I don't think so. I never thought of it in that way, but maybe it's just because I've never reconciled the revelation that he has 19 kids.
I mean, it's obviously a throwaway joke, but
it is, but it's still like a hugely
it's a
mind-blowing revelation.
Joke.
Right, it's a life-altering joke for this character who debuted in Diddy Kong Racing. Like, so, like, at one stage in time, he was basically at the same stature as Banjo was, you know. Obviously, never really, but, yeah, it's still like, wow, Tip-Top has 19, because, of course, you know, given what we learn about his parents in Grunty's Revenge, guess it just runs in the family. So anyway, Kazooie has to hatch Tip Tup's egg, and this is where the character Tip Tup Jr., Tip Tup's first son, debuts. And Tip Tup Jr. is weird. He's kind of become this weirdly minor fan favorite character in niche circles of the fandom, to the point where, like, there's all these weird theories that Tip Tup Jr. is the Tip Tup in Diddy Kong Racing DS and not Tip Tup. And I'm like, calm down.
Something I like about Tip Tup and Tip Tup Jr. is the incidental dialogue, which this game always has a lot of, but I love the one specific line of, because obviously you're not supposed to be able to do this until Kazooie gets the hatch ability a few worlds later. But you can try to blow the egg open with grenade eggs to Tip Tup reprimanding you for what the horrible thing you're doing.
Naturally, this is what your first instinct would be. Right.
And I'm curious, in subsequent playthroughs, I don't know if you do this, but I tend to prolong solving Tip Tup's problem as much as possible, because he's one of the few NPCs in the game who completely disappears after you solve his problem. And sometimes I'll just have him there helpless because I like that Tip Tup is around in the game. And I'm selfish.
It's comforting to have your old racing buddy around. I mean, it's just like, you don't want the good times to end, even though he's patiently awaiting the birth of his child. It was a weird revelation to say, Tip Tup's already a father 19 times over. Here comes number 20. Like, that's just such a... Again, you have your preconceived notions about these characters, and then to have a new revelation that completely upends everything you held dear about that character, it's kind of, takes a while to become acclimated to, but it's funny. And, like, Tip Tup, weirdly, like, Tip Tup wouldn't really have much of a role to play in a Banjo series going forward. He has a minor cameo in Banjo Pilot, and if any character should have been a playable character in Banjo Pilot and gotten a promotion along with Jolly Roger, it should have been Tip Tup, but I digress. Then there was the allusion to him in Grunty's Revenge as well, but he wasn't in Nuts and Bolts at all.
No, there's kind of a sideways allusion to him with Tank Tup, or a facsimile thereof, being in the game.
Sure.
He doesn't appear, and I did think that was very strange at the time.
Maybe that was like a contractual thing where it's like, okay, I can appear in Diddy Kong Racing DS, but I'm sitting out Nuts and Bolts.
I did have to wonder if maybe that was the case to not call attention to him being in Diddy Kong Racing DS, but we do know from, like, details of Banjo X that have trickled out of the years, like, there was, at one point, a plan to have Tip Tup around, because we've seen his character model, and he...
Although Banjo X was before Diddy Kong Racing DS would have been an active project, I think.
He also appered in the kind of experimental Fast and Furious build, like I think there was like a Tip Tup bowling game. He's very oddly prolific, or as prolific as you can get when the games you're in don't actually come out.
It was a Tip Tup curling game, of all things, and it was pre-Connect. It was kind of like the proto-Connect that Rare was developing ideas for before the Connect and before they became the Connect Sports Studio for a couple of years.
Right.
Tip Tup is waiting for that big comeback. No pun intended. All right, let's talk really quick about Trotty and Piggles, because pigs are important in Jolly Roger's Lagoon for some reason, and Piggles is basically your normal child pig. Just wants to go swimming in the water in the little I guess, freshwater pond to the side of Jolly Roger's Lagoon. But the water is too cold, and oh wait, the water is also polluted, and his friend Trotty has become mutated with a third arm because of the toxic runoffs from Grunty Industries.
Yeah, it's funny. I think of Yooka-Laylee, and I remember at the time thinking, well, the Knights of Camelot are kind of weird. I don't really associate the Banjo team with pigs that much, and no, here they are, all over Jolly Roger's Lagoon.
Yeah, and it's funny how, like, much the design... I mean, granted, there's only so much you can do with pigs, I guess, but it's funny to me how the designs of these pigs in Jolly Roger's Lagoon sync up so much with Professor Chops and the oinks of Retro's Donkey Kong games.
Yeah, and I think Trotty was one of the first experiments I did, like, again, talking about dialogue variety in this game, of... So you can split Banjo and Kazooie up from Witchyworld onward, and because Banjo and Kazooie have certain repartee together, that doesn't work if you only have one of them, because Banjo's not mean. He won't insult characters for the sake of a joke like Kazooie will. Yeah. So if you encounter Trotty with just Banjo and kind of listen to his sad story about growing 3 arms, Banjo will say, well, I didn't want to say anything, and Trotty will say, well, thank you, I'm very sensitive about it, and Banjo will respond, well, I'm sure no one has noticed. But if Kazooie is around, she'll take him saying he's very sensitive about it as a cue to call him Freako.
Yeah, Kazooie is not... This is why, as much as I like Kazooie, I'm also like, Jesus, Kazooie. Like, I'm continually let down by Kazooie.
Kazooie walks the line of, like... I generally don't like humor that centers on, like... Wouldn't this person be so terrible to be around? But with Kazooie, I like her being mean.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever glorified when she's mean, so, you know...
Also, she's the constant butt of slapstick in the game, so it's...
Right, the fact that one of the stop and swap, or not stop and swap, but one of the bonus things you can get from Heggy is a move where you just use Kazooie, where Banjo just uses Kazooie as...
Now a move in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate.
Now immortalized in Smash Bros., that's right. But yeah, Trotty, not only is it, like, tying into a later world in Grunty Industries, but it's also more of the ecological message that Rare always goes to of, hey, aren't factories and capitalism without, restriction, isn't that awful? Isn't that just harmful and the worst? And here we see it manifest in actually mutating a small child who just wanted to go swimming. But there is another aspect to Jolly Roger's Lagoon besides the surface world, and that is under the sea. And oh my, do you go deep under the sea. All the way to the lost civilization of Atlantis. And it's not like it's some sort of, like, fictitious version. Well, I know Atlantis is, you know, arguably fictitious, but...
I mean, they don't give it a silly name. It's just Atlantis.
Right. It's not like it's Jinjo Lantis or G Lantis or whatever. It's Atlantis. The actual lost civilization of Atlantis is just off the coast of the Isle o' Hags. And I kind of love this the more I thought about it, and the more I connected dots between the like this and Kremlantis from the Donkey Kong series and the whole ancient history of the Rare Archipelago. But en route to Atlantis, you will also encounter, this is just like, I don't know, the usual programming on the History Channel, but you encounter a downed spaceship of a UFO, like not even a UFO. It's identified. It is a spaceship. It is a flying saucer, and it has crashed in the ocean. And there are aliens inside, and I think they're supposed to be what we know as like greys, right? Like I think it's supposed to be like the rare take, the banjo take.
Yeah, I mean, Kazooie even has a line asking if one of them is named Elvis, who is the gray alien in Perfect Dark.
And it's funny because I hadn't played Perfect Dark up until that point, so I thought that was just a reference to the jokey idea that Elvis was abducted by aliens instead of dying on a toilet. But that itself in Perfect Dark, I believe, was an allusion to that. So it's all connected. But aliens, actual aliens, not Witchyworld employees in alien mask. And they come back. Like you help them out, you help them get out of the ocean, you restart their engines, and there's this whole bit where like you learn that they might have been here to disintegrate the Earth, but they decided not to do that. Which is just like, what the hell have Banjo and Kazooie stumbled into, and did they just inadvertently save the world? But the aliens come back. This is just like laying the groundwork for future worlds, even if it's so weird that you've met extraterrestrials here underneath the ocean of Jolly Roger's Lagoon. They do come back later on too. So when you actually get to Atlantis, there are mermaid statues there, and the keen observer of rare games and the DKU will note that the mermaid statues are of the mermaids from, or actually the mermaid from off of Donkey Kong 64.
Yeah, another weird happenstance of, well, not humans, but a humanoid being in Banjo. Which I guess isn't really that weird now that I think about it. There's kind of tons of them.
So when I was talking about how, like, the more I thought about Atlantis, how much I really dug the idea that this Atlantis was in the Rare Archipelago, well, this even, like, ties into this notion that the mermaid culture that we saw a glimpse of in Donkey Kong 64 had some sort of alliance with the Atlantis civilization. So it just, like, really spurs the imagination of like, all like the ancient history, and like, was there this like rivalry between Atlantis and Kremlanus, and like what happened like to sink Atlantis? Were the Kremlins responsible for the sinking of Atlantis? I don't know, but your brain can really go into some fun directions with that. So Atlantis, visiting Atlantis, there are two ways to get around it. Well, Mumbo will oxygenate the water, which really makes this whole world a lot more bearable than it would be otherwise, because you don't have to worry about drowning. And that is the thing about underwater worlds that I hate, when they have an air meter and you're constantly having to think about, oh god, I'm gonna run out of air, I need to find the oxygen bubbles. It's fine in small doses like Loop in Clanker's Cavern in Banjo-Kazooie. But I, like, in Tropical Freeze, that was like the one slog in Tropical Freeze was the fact that they added an air meter to the underwater levels, and all of a sudden you had to worry about that, in addition to like all the exploring you had to do.
It's a really nice conceit to have. This is the water-themed world of the game, and it's the one in which the normal rules don't apply, so that you have that freedom without the constant anxiety of running out of air.
Yeah, so as much as I might not like necessarily dig the Atlantis and surrounding area portions as much as the town, the fact that they did this for you enjoyable and less anxiety-inducing than it would be otherwise. Also, the transformation is excellent. The submarine, which is basically just now you can move faster and you have all this ammunition in the form of missiles. So, I mean, either way, it's not bad to get around these underwater portions.
Yeah. The transformation is also unique in that I think it might be the only transformation in the game where you can fight the world's boss while transformed.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that time in Donkey Kong Country 2 where you're like, whoa, I'm fighting the boss as an animal buddy. Same principle here, sort of. Whoa, I'm fighting the boss as a transformation. Before we talk about the boss, should we talk about Crispy Bacon?
I think we should.
Okay. Crispy Bacon, if you can't tell from the name, was also a fan-named character. It was the Nintendo UK magazine that these were derived from, right?
They got some pretty good results out of this name contest, I gotta say. I think all of them are at least funny, even if they're like slightly off-brand from what the Banjo team themselves would do. They're still very funny puns. And I mean, I think they're off-brand in that this isn't just like Piggo or something.
Right, but Piggo or like Snouty or just the usual.
I'm giving them too little
kind of
credit, but it's like it's a slightly different flavor of pun than Trotty and Pickles is what I guess I'd mean. Get it? Because bacon. Yeah.
Right. Crispy Bacon, though, as much as like the name is a little weird to me because it's so different, I really like his design in that he's wearing Union Jack swimming trunks, and he's got like the scuba gear, and he's also got a Game Boy camera that he's taking underwater pictures with, which I'm not 100% sure would work. And by 100% sure, I mean I'm 0% sure it wouldn't work.
I love the Game Boy camera that he's shooting with.
It's one of those great like instances of rare just like having like, I don't know why Nintendo didn't want to buy them, because they were great at product integration. Like they were great at creating this corporate synergy in their games. Like, yeah, we'll promote the Game Boy camera in Banjo-Tooie, a game that doesn't have Game Boy camera functionality whatsoever.
There's no way those pictures wouldn't just be a wall of solid black pixels, though.
Oh yeah, that's what makes it so funny, though. It's almost like they are promoting the Game Boy camera, but they're also kind of taking a piss out of the Game Boy camera by like having this absurdly ludicrous conceit of Crispy Bacon using the Game Boy camera to take underwater pictures.
I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't also bring up the real life Crispy Bacon, which is a pig that was born with malformed hind legs that they built a wheelchair or wheel hind legs for him to get around. And the pig was named Crispy Bacon, and specifically cited Banjo-Tooie was the source of the name.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's awesome. I know there's like a kid's book with a character also named Crispy Bacon, but you see that kind of crop up a lot with a lot of lesser known DKU characters. I remember there was also maybe a graphic novel called Batula, a graphic novel for kids called Batula that was about a bat.
There's a children's book about a cat called Mr. Pants. And I constantly get that in search results.
Oh, that's just sacrilegious right there. That shouldn't be allowed. Lord Wu Fak, the boss of Jolly Roger's Lagoon, a big anglerfish, and yet again, I need to point out that the male anglerfish do not have the bioluminescent tips. That is a trait of the female, and yet time and again in the DKU, we see it applied to anglerfish that are referred to as males. So I just assume that in the Rare Archipelago there is a a unique breed of anglerfish that have males with bioluminescent tips. Anyway, Lord Wu Fak Fak, he's disgusting.
Yeah,
in that you shoot his boils,
which spurt blood upon being hit. Like,
I'm almost
blood.
Amazed.
This isn't like an Ocarina of Time situation.
Well, yeah, I was like, I'm amazed that there was never like a second release where they changed it to green or anything. Like all the changes made to Ocarina of Time in re-releases, but yeah, Lord Wu Fak Fak, it's a Grant Kirkhope-ism, is it not?
Well, not to belabor names again, but this is apparently the source of this name was Paul Makachek swearing to himself while working on the game. Paul
Makachek, yes. Yeah, no, Grant Kirkhope was Ooh My Knackers. That's where I was confusing it. Yes,
and
Paul Makachek.
That amuses me to no end because Lord Wu Fak Fak's boss music has made it into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, so there is a song in an extremely high-profile game named after Paul Makachek cursing to himself.
I wonder how that makes him feel. If he feels like he's immortal, if he feels like he's made a difference in this world. And granted, he also gave us It's Mr. Pants and Donkey Kong Land, so in my heart, of course, but obviously, to the normies out there, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is so much more meaningful than those games, so. Yeah, Lord Wu Fak Fak, I remember this being a hard boss fight, but I never felt like it was not enjoyable. Like, I remember it was like, I dug playing it. Like, it was fun to me, even though I found it quite a bit more challenging than the first three bosses.
It's a very tense one, and I think especially if you don't use the submarine for it, because I inevitably reach a point where I run out of ammo.
Oh yeah, I definitely would not attempt this without the submarine. But yeah, I think out of like all the boss fights in Banjo-Tooie, Lord Wu Fak Fak is one that I generally think of the most. There's
also a very unique feature to him relative to any other boss in the game. I think he's the only... Well, maybe Weldar does it too. He's one of the only bosses in the game that you can revisit after defeating him.
Oh yeah, and he's... You get to kind of... Like, there's Old King Cole who becomes, like, an aspect of Chuffy, but here you get to kind of revel in your victory over him.
Because he goes upside down as a dead fish does, but you can revisit his locker and he will talk to you moaning about how you broke into his home and killed him.
Yeah, and that in and of itself makes the whole boss fight worth it in my mind. Alright, so just checking in with a live stream chat really quick. Thank you for staying with us on yet another long episode. It's the it's the MFkin J-Tess says Lord Wu Fak Fak is too iconic. And Gibbon says, is this like the Megs keeling over but continuing to follow you with their eyes, referring to Sea of Thieves? A little bit. There's a little bit of Lord Wu Fak Fak in those Megalodons. And anyway,
Also, Gibbon says that an alternative Banjo wiki says Pono is a weasel.
I don't think he's a weasel.
I think he might be, and we're just so used to what the weasels look like in Conquer that my brain rejects the idea that he's a weasel.
Well, Conquer and Donkey Kong 64.
Oh, right.
Because Snide. Yeah. Maybe he's like a muskrat. I don't know. Ray Day Pinball says, I've never seen the Grunty secret. I was envious when Game Explain played it on their YouTube and got it on like the third try. Well, that pisses me off too. And Gibbon, in reference to Jolly Roger, says Nintendo's weird in that they actually have a lot of casual representation, but there's always an asterisk. Yeah, I guess that's, I know, like, there was, like, a lot of, like, games in Japan that never really made it over here, and there's a lot of, like, ambiguous cases, but I'm not really the expert on that either, so I can't speak to any franchise that isn't part of the DKU. Yeah, I feel like Jolly Roger is definitely, like, especially in the West, just like the first out and out LGBTQ plus character. Like, I can't think of any others. And then, you know, you run into cases like Birdo where they, like, backtrack, and it's just like, yeah, anyway. Well, should we take the calls, Cameron?
I think we should.
Alright, so here we go. First call of 5.
Hello, DK Vine. It is John Tessier calling, a.k.a. J-Tess Express, whatever you want to call me. Anyway, so we're talking about Banjo-Tooie, the first 4 levels of Banjo-Tooie. Banjo-Tooie, I believe, was the first game I was ever hyped for, because I was only 5 years old when Banjo-Tooie came out. So, like, the first game I was hyped for, I knew was coming out, and I was excited for, I think was Banjo-Tooie. And what a game. What a game to be excited for. So the first 4 levels of Banjo-Tooie are interesting. In relation to the first 4 levels to Banjo-Kazooie, I think they're really interesting, because personally, I think Mayhem Temple is a much better level than Mumbo's Mountain. But I think Treasure Trove Cove is a much better level than Gulch Mine. And then I think Witchyworld is a much better level than Clanker's Cavern. But I also think Bubble Gloop Swamp is a better level than Jolly Roger's Bay, Lagoon, I forget. I know I'm a terrible fan. Anyway, in relation to those, it's weird, you know, it goes back and forth. But I really think Glitter Gulch Mine is really weird that it's the second level. I find it really boring and really mundane, and it's always like a stick in the mud in my playthrough in Banjo-Tooie. It's only the second level. And, you know, and Treasure Trove Cove is such a fun level to play. It's like you want to get through Mumbo's Mountain really fast so you can get to Treasure Trove Cove, and then you get to Clanker's Cavern. It's like, okay, I gotta get through this now. So, Banjo-Tooie gets that mundaneness a little quicker, and that's my criticism of it, I guess. But anyway, you know, that's all I gotta say.
Well, thank you, John. And I think John basically echoed some opinions we shared on our
certainly no judgment on the Jolly Roger Bay Lagoon confusion.
You know, and I you know, it's hard for me to really, like, do a one-on-one comparison with, like, Mayhem Temple versus Mumbo's Mountain or Treasure Trove Cove versus Glitter Gulch Mine, because I feel like I said, like, Mayhem Temple just feels like it comes after Click Cluck Wood to me, so it feels like it's just more of a continuation. But I can see what you're saying there, where Treasure Trove Cove definitely feels like the superior second world of the game, or of a game, compared to Glitter Gulch Mine.
It certainly feels more like this is the next step up from Mumbo's Mountain in the context of that game. Yeah. More so than Glitter Gulch Mine is kind of doing its own thing, I think, in the grand scheme. I don't really know if it's that logical continuation from Mayahem Temple. The only one where I'm kind of iffy is Bubble Gloop Swamp being out and out better than Jolly Roger's Lagoon. I'm not really sure. That's like 2 very different flavors to me. I think in the grand scheme, like Jolly Roger's Lagoon more.
I think Jolly Roger's Lagoon has the higher highs, but it also might have lower lows, where Bubble Gloop Swamp is just kind of even.
The world building elevates it so much in my mind that I'm willing to forgive any of the parts that I think are a little bit weaker, I think.
Where the coolest thing in Bubble Gloop Swamp was Tip Top. Like, oh my god, there's Tip Top!
Which Jolly Roger's Lagoon has.
You're right. So, yeah, we can have our cake and eat it too in Jolly Roger's Lagoon. But, again, you know, we all have different opinions, and there's no wrong opinion. It's all down to personal taste. It's subjective. Thank you for the call. All right, let's take number 2. E.
Hello. Kongversation, Angry Ancestor, this is. You know, as soon as you said you were doing a Banjo-Tooie spotlight, my eyes lit up. I got so excited, and I just couldn't stop thinking about, you guessed it, Dilberta. Just such an iconic character, really the face of the Banjo-Kazooie series. Really, anytime I hear the word banjo, I get this vivid imagery of Dilberta and Bully and Bill fornicating atop the Dive of Death in Witchyworld, which I imagine is not an uncommon phenomenon. But what confuses me is that with all the characters in the Banjo series that have been upgraded to the supporting cast, like Jolly Roger, Captain Blubber, fucking Mr. Fit, where's Dilberta? Why is Dilberta not being upgraded like the rest of the cast? And that leads me to my question to you two. What are your top 5 favorite Dilberta quotes? And just as like a follow-up optional question, if you had to take one character that debuted in Banjo-Tooie, one mindless idiot who asks for your help, and if you can upgrade them to supporting cast, who would they be and why is it Dilberta? Happy holidays and fuck you.
Thank you, Angry Ancestor. Whoops. We've got a Dilberta fan on the line, Cameron. I wasn't expecting that.
Oh, top 5 Dilberta quotes. Oh, they're all so good.
It wouldn't be fair to single one out,
right?
Yeah, it wouldn't be fair to single any single one out because it would just be an injustice to say they're not all of equal caliber. So I'm gonna take a pass on that question. To your second question, we'll answer that. What supporting character would we like to see upped to main supporting character status, a la Jolly Roger? Cameron.
Well, that's a tricky one.
Especially since he got into the Star Fox series, so.
I'm gonna have to think on that one. I mean, what would you pick, Hyle?
Well, I think if you phrase it like a Banjo-Tooie debut character that got promoted, so it can't be Tip Top like I just said. Whew. Oh boy.
I mean, this isn't necessarily my answer, but can I say it's weird that Jam Jars has been kind of understated in the series going forward?
Yeah, that is weird. No, that is definitely weird. I think I will go with not Heggy, that's for sure. Why don't we say I'm interested in the aliens because we just talked about the aliens. So like Alf or any of the his alien comrades. I would like to see more of them. I think it'd be interesting if one of them came back in a reoccurring. And I'll probably change my mind because that might be a rubbish idea in the cold light of morning. So, I don't know. We've been doing this for 3.5 hours. What do you want from me, Angry Ancestor? We've reached Heggy discussion stage of this podcast episode. I'm broken right now. So, and you broke me with your Dilberta call. Thank you very much.
It's hard for me to think of one because most of the ones I can think to say have already come back in some way, even when, like, I wouldn't think there would be a logical reason to, like, I mean, there is a logical reason to this, but I can't say the Saucer of Pearl because they did come back in Nuts and Bolts in a pretty sizable way.
I think he's saying, like, but, I mean, there's a difference between coming back and being Jolly Roger status coming back. And anytime I want to be like a weirdo hipster with my answer, I'm like, well, Mr. Pants. I'm like, well, he got his own spin-off game, so fuck that. Like Rare already beat me to the punch there. So, And it's hard because there's characters like Konga I would like to see more of, but they debuted in Banjo-Kazooie. I feel like Jolly Roger would have been the choice, and they already got to him. So.
Yeah, I'm stumped on this one. I mean,
So Pano?
Not Pano. I can tell you which ones it wouldn't be, at least. I'd say maybe Minji Jongo, just because what does a character whose whole existence is they were meant to trick you into thinking they were mumbo jumbo do after that big moment? Also,
He could become like the Wario of
but also
the
he
series.
exploded, so...
Oh, yeah. Well, you could always be rebuilt. I mean, that's just...
The aliens, I think, are a good answer. They seem to have, like, the same recurring character potential that somebody like Jolly would, where they can just show up and there's no real question asked about why they're able to show up again.
And if you ever took the Banjo-Kazooie series actually into space and not just a facsimile of space like has been done both in Tooie and Nuts and Bolts, then I think the aliens would be a good like avenue to do that. Like, come on, let's go to our home planet. Let's go to our home star and Zeti Reticula or wherever. So yeah. All right, let's just say the aliens and move on to call 3. Thank you for the call, Angry Ancestor, and fuck you too.
Hey guys, Rick here. So I really like the temple area because it's just, I mean, it's the first world, so you usually would think about the first world in a game, but I really like the art of Banjo and Kazooie flying over it and that artwork, and it's kind of, I guess you're going through like a hallway almost at first, but you've got the soccer area and the first-person shooter area, and I really like the music and the big gold bear, and it's got a lot to it. It's really nice. It's really like, I like being there, right? Glitter Gulch, I think my favorite thing about it was getting the fox guy and the rat back together. Because they're just like, they're so happy to be back because the rat's like, wee, wee, and the fox is like, wee, wee. So, they're cool. Witchyworld, I think you gotta do a bunch of stuff before you can really complete it, so I found it confusing for whatever reason. And then Jolly Roger's Lagoon is cool, and I like how you gotta get into the ocean, you gotta figure a way to navigate through it, but it's also the furthest I've gotten. I played Tooie right after completing Kazooie for the first time, and I think I burned myself out that way. But I'm gonna go back to Tooie at some point. But later, guys.
All right. Rick also had a 20-second follow-up call, so let's go ahead and play that.
I just remembered why I didn't beat the game, or I didn't get further than the Lagoon, because of fucking fuck, Lord fucking Fack. That boss fight sucks. I didn't like it, and I lost, and I was just done. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the calls, Rick.
I think I have to rescind my answer from the last call, Hyle. I mean, that the pulse of the DK Vine audience wants more Bully and Bill and Dilberta.
Clearly, we have misjudged our own audience, our own listeners. It's like we've been completely oblivious to the mania before us, the groundswell of support. The pollsters got it wrong, Cameron. Clearly the people want Dilberta, the rat, and Bully and Bill, the fox. We don't know. Nobody knows.
I do think like Bully and Bill is an oddly understated part of Glitter Gulch Mine, because I think of him as like the mascot of that world, but he's only really relevant for 2 things.
Was Bully and Bill one of the fan name characters?
He was, yeah.
Okay, because that's another name that... He sounds like a pirate in Sea of Thieves rather than a Banjo-Tooie era character. Anyway, thank you for the calls, Rick, and I'm sorry that Lord Wu Fact broke you in such a significant way. I hope you're not laying upside down in your room and being taunted by Lord Wu Fak Fak, who comes to visit you on a regular basis. All right, let's take the final call and wrap up this episode and get some rest for part 3.
Hello, Mr. DK Vine and guest. It is your favorite, Fiddle Nipples Kevin. Sadly, I missed part 1 of the Banjo-Tooie retrospective, so I'm making sure to call in this time. I just wanted to say that Witchyworld is my favorite level in the game. Something about rundown and dangerous theme park carnival levels just called to me. Funny tidbit, I never knew you could get a cheat code from Grunty in her tent until I watched a friend playing their copy. Literally, every time I have ever gone into that tent, I just received a beating. Which leads to my question. After beating the game, you can return to the tent and still get a beating or prizes if you're lucky, which I'm not, apparently. So, is this some hard light hologram shenanigans? A time-displaced tent? What's the deal here?
Huh.
Oh no, Cameron.
That's a conundrum. I've never put thought to that. Huh.
Oh no. Our audience, my audience, it's like Frankenstein's monster. They've turned on me with my own creation.
There's something about Cauldron Keep and just being an absolute plot hole magnet, huh?
Well, I take it to be like the situation like in Donkey Kong Country, right? Where you beat K. Rool and you can go back into Donkey Kong's cave and the bananas are there, but then there are still Kremlings roaming jungle hijinks. Like, it's just one of those things where you kind of have to accept it in this vacuum of this little sliver takes place post-game, but then when you're out and about, it's just like right before K. Rool is defeated.
I feel like there are ways to write around it, but the joke is at its funniest if it is actually Gruntilda in that tent beating you with a broom or whatever. So I don't want to dilute the joke. I kind of just want to hum loudly until the continuity problem goes away.
And also, we are over 3.5 hours into this episode, and I just don't want to talk anymore.
But, I mean, I do think it's Gruntilda in there at all times. It's just... Well, we kind of got to accept the convention.
If she's not in the tent, maybe she's astral projecting in the tent. We know she can, like, we could pop her ghost out.
We could say the same thing about capital B at the end of Ukulele. Though I guess you can refight that boss at the end. I don't think you can refight Hag 1, can you?
I
can't remember. I'm a bad Banjo-Tooie fan.
Maybe we'll have the answer for that in part 3, where we wrap up the Banjo-Tooie Spotlight series, minus the episode I do with Steve from Alpha Rare Gamer about Stop and Swap. To be continued.
In part 3E.
This has been a File 2 production.
¡Qué rico!